you're going to do, which will carry on, and we'll get another one at 1 o'clock. So thank you for joining us. We've come to the end of our show.
That's right. We'll be back with Britain's Newsroom tomorrow at 9:30. Up next is GB News Live with Emily Carver and Pip Thompson. But here is your news with Sophia Wensler.
See you tomorrow.
Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 12. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. The Prime Minister says his new cabinet is the team to make big, bold decisions to drive change. He addressed his new cabinet for the first time after his dramatic reshuffle, which saw David Cameron make an unexpected return to frontline politics. In a major gamble, Rishi Sunak gave the former Prime Minister a peerage in order to make him Foreign Secretary. Lord Cameron admits such a return is not usual, but says he wants to support Mr Sunak through a difficult job at a hard time. The Prime Minister addressed his cabinet and pledged to change the country for the better.
I know that this strong and united team is going to deliver that change for everybody. We've got an important week coming up. On Wednesday, we'll have inflation numbers. We'll also have the Supreme Court ruling on our Rwanda plan. And next Wednesday, the Chancellor will be delivering an important autumn statement. And across all of that, I'm confident that we can demonstrate to the country that we're making progress on the priorities that I set out at the beginning of the year. And looking around this table, I know that we have an energetic and enthusiastic team that is going to deliver for the country. So let's get to work.
Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones, told GB News he thinks Rishi Sunak's move is desperate.
My observation would be that having David Cameron as Foreign Secretary doesn't solve Rishi Sunak's problems. In fact, it's quite odd to me that Rishi Sunak has had to look to the past to try to bring back a quote-unquote grown-up to help get a control of the Conservative Party. If Rishi Sunak was a good enough Prime Minister, he would be able to get a grip of this, and he's failed to do so.
The World Health Organization has compared the Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza to a cemetery as bodies pile up. The hospital, besieged by Israeli forces, is no longer functioning with insufficient electricity, water and other basics. Israel has accused Hamas of having a command and control centre under the hospital, which the terror group denies. The pace of wage growth has eased back from a record level, with no change in the UK's unemployment rate. Figures from the Office for National Statistics found average wages, excluding bonuses, were 7.7% higher than a year earlier in the 3 months to September. That's down from the revised 7.9% level registered last month. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has welcomed the growth and said his autumn statement will set out his plans to get people back into work. The government is considering making the Chickenpox vaccine available on the NHS, following a recommendation by scientists. The Joint Committee of Vaccination and Immunisation say the jab should be given to youngsters in 2 doses when they're 12 months and 18 months old. It says data from countries suggests the vaccine would dramatically reduce circulating chickenpox and prevent most severe cases in children. The committee has also recommended a temporary catch-up programme for older children to be included. Police have arrested 115 Just Stop Oil protesters after they slow-marched on the A41 and blocked a major road. A group marched on Hendon Way yesterday morning, including the Brent Cross flyover. The group claims the Metropolitan Police had blocked the flyover, preventing protesters from clearing the road. The force responded by saying all the activists have been arrested as they showed no intention of leaving the road. And applications have opened for Britons to register their XL bully dogs from exemption before the breed is made illegal. Owners who want to keep their dogs have to apply to an exemption scheme or choose to have their dog euthanised and apply for compensation. It will be illegal to own an XL bully from the 1st of February next year. They must be registered by the end of January. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on your digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to you.
Hello and welcome to GB News Live. And we start today with a scene from Westminster that few people would have expected or predicted.
Yes, David Cameron attending a cabinet meeting after returning to the frontline politics 7 years after standing down as Prime Minister. He attended this first meeting of Rishi Sunak's new-look cabinet following his shock appointment as Foreign Secretary.
The Prime Minister is stressing the importance of building a united team after his dramatic reshuffle yesterday. But to do that, He's going to have to fight off some MPs on the right of the party who are said to be furious over the sacking of Suella Braverman as Home Secretary.
Yes, so joining us now from Downing Street is GB News political editor Christopher Hope. Christopher, thank you very much indeed. There you are outside a rather rainy number 10 Downing Street. Can you bring us up to date? What was said at this cabinet meeting this morning?
Well, the former Prime Minister, David Cameron, Lord Cameron to us all now, the Foreign Secretary, sat opposite Rishi Sunak, the old seat he used to occupy, of course, his first visit back to 10 Downing Street in a formal role for Lord Cameron since he quit on the steps number 10 behind me back in 2016. And the PM, Mr Sunak, made very clear it's time to move on. This is the team now to take the country forward, he said, and he made clear that he wants to try and move forward with the group he's got around him. And it was an attempt to reset his government without Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, who we are still to hear from. The Tory MPs on the right are furious about what happened. We'll be hearing from a group called the New Conservatives shortly today. They are the group Danny Kruger, Miriam Cates. These are people who want to try and help the Tory party find its electoral mojo, because the party is still 20 points behind in the polls. So there's some concern about why on earth Lord Cameron now, as he is, became Foreign Secretary when they couldn't find a Foreign Secretary from the elected rump of the Tory party still in Parliament on the back benches. These reshuffles, I've seen so many of them, they do create far more enemies, problems for the government than they do find solutions. For every one person cheered up by a good plum ministerial job, getting paid a few £1,000s more on your MP salary, there's 2 or 3 who are being overlooked. And they're the ones I think the PM needs to look out for now.
And there is quite a week coming up, isn't there, Chris? We've got the Supreme Court ruling on Rwanda tomorrow. We've got new inflation figures expected this week. Plus, also, we've got Jeremy Hunt's autumn statement next week. They had a lot to talk about round that table.
And there's a lot happening. So tomorrow, you're absolutely right, it's inflation figures. They should show, I think Liam Halligan will know more on this, but they should show inflation heading on down towards the idea of halving it by the end of the year, in this calendar year. That was the one of 5 targets the PM, Mr Sunak, set himself. We're also going to see the Rwanda decision around 10 a.m. tomorrow morning, and then a government response. Now, the Cabinet has met. We'll wait and see what comes from that. There's briefing happening right now to journalists. We'll wait until that's finished before we can talk about that meeting. But we are going to see, I think, a response from the government tomorrow, the PM tomorrow. And then, of course, we're looking into next week already. Next Wednesday is the autumn statement. Next Thursday, don't forget, is the net migration figures for last year. How many immigrants were allowed into the UK legally by this government? The government which said it would take back control over its borders and laws.
Yes, of course, net migration figures as well. There is indeed a lot on their plate in the coming days and weeks. Now, yesterday, we saw Andrea Jenkins, MP, boldly put in a letter of no confidence. Are you hearing anything with regards to any further names coming forward?
Not yet. I mean, people, allies of Rishi Sunak call her the pantomime dame, which is a bit unfair on Andrea Jenkins. I think she's a much more serious person than that. But she is certainly out there on the limb of the kind of pro-Boris Johnson camp. And she's concerned about what happened with this reshuffle yesterday. Who is the right winger in the cabinet? Well, it might be Esther McVey, our former colleague at GBNews, now the Minister without portfolio, the Minister for Common Sense, we're told. That's the best the right have got now, and she can only attend cabinet, isn't actually a fully fledged cabinet minister. Lee Rowley is the other person who Number 10 point out as being a right winger, but really the right have been expunged from the top of government with the removal of Suella Braverman, and that is the problem, I think, which the PM has got. He's now, I think, looking to elections thinking, let's go back to the middle ground, as exemplified by David Cameron, who, of course, owned that space, didn't he, back in the late noughties and early 2010s. They're hoping, gambling, that could win the election. But of course, it didn't win in 2010. Only a coalition was formed with the Liberal Democrats. Let's see how well it does in the next election. Maybe they can scrape a small majority, but that looks unlikely given the polling.
Also, Chris, I don't know whether that meeting has started yet, but the Prime Minister is meeting the Met Police Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, as well today, believed to be discussing the protests that happened last weekend and the ensuing trouble.
Yeah, well, that meeting's underway. It hasn't yet finished yet. Well, as soon as we get a readout from that meeting, we'll update GB News viewers. The PM, of course, was concerned, as was Suella Braverman, about the images from the weekend, the protesters, the counter-protesters among the 300,000 Palestinians who marched for peace, for the ceasefire in Gaza on Saturday. And they want to find out what can do more. There's rumours, of course, about trying to tighten up the public order legislation to make it easier for police to step in to respond to concerns of politicians, perhaps make it easier to ban marches like that if there's going to be some difficult and some offensive remarks made to faith groups. They may even look at banning marches and demonstrations on days of national solemnity, such as Armistice Day, the 11th of November. We'll wait and see, but it did pass off. There was trouble, but it wasn't as bad as it might have been. That's a relief, because don't forget, last Wednesday the PM, Rishi Sunak, summoned Mark Rowley to a meeting to demand that any protesters couldn't go anywhere near the remembrance commemorations. The following day, we saw that article by the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, which really did lay into the police and accuse them of favouritism. So I think the PM is on the same page as the Home Secretary, or want to do something about it. It's the language where there's differentiation.
Yes, and we saw Jacob Rees-Mogg wrote for The Telegraph, I believe, saying that Suella Braverman was sacked for being right, in his view. And we've also heard from Lord David Frost. He thinks this reshuffle is moving back to a pre-Brexit type of government. But there you go. Thank you very much indeed for your time, Christopher Hope, there, our political editor outside number 10 Downing Street, keeping dry just about.
Let's see if it's as wet in the red wall seat of Stoke-on-Trent today. Joining us there is our reporter, Jack Carson. Oh, Jack, it's looking a little drier. Red wall seat, how are people feeling there? Because it looks like it's now the blue seats being targeted by the government.
Yeah, it's gone down certainly with a mixed reception here. Particularly, I think the sticking point that I found speaking to people today is the fact that David Cameron was made a Lord in order to become Foreign Secretary. One person did tell me that was it really the case that out of all of the MPs that Rishi Sunak has got, were none of them available to come and do the job? It certainly didn't fill them with confidence, of course, going into next year, which we do expect, of course, to be that big election year. Here, this is the seat of Stoke-on-Trent North, where I'm in the town of Burslem, just outside the city centre of Stoke. Of course, it was a big Brexit area back in 2019. It went to the Conservatives. Jonathan Gullis is the MP for this constituency. It flipped decades and decades of Labour holding this seat, but of course, with that Brexit referendum and now having a Chancellor in number 11, which of course was a campaigner for the Remain campaign, having now a Foreign Secretary, of course, which was campaigning for the Remain campaign. There were some people that I've spoken to that were disappointed, of course, that voting for Boris in 2019, they don't necessarily feel the benefits and the positives that they saw of Brexit have been enacted, but also they're now disappointed in the decisions that maybe Rishi Sunak is making. So can he still win here? That's the big question. I've asked a couple of people today. Here's what they told me.
Rishi Sunak, I don't think so. I don't know, maybe Labour.
It was a surprise, didn't expect it at all, but I'm confident he's very experienced and I think he'll do a good job. I think he will, yeah, I'm sure he will. Conservative. Always have.
Yeah, so mixed reaction there, certainly with whether Rishi Sunak can still, of course, keep this seat, but also the reaction that you heard there from David Cameron coming back. There was certainly some shock that Suella Braverman was sacked as Home Secretary, but one person did tell me that actually they'd talked a lot about their plans and, of course, trying to stop the boats, but they didn't feel like any action was actually really being taken. Now, of course, the Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones, did tell GB News earlier, of course, that having David Cameron as Foreign Secretary doesn't solve Rishi Sunak's problems. He said that it's odd that he's looked to the past to hire. He's called a grown-up to try and help control the party, and of course, control the party is certainly what Rishi Sunak's going to have to do. He believes he's built a cabinet, of course, to try and make, as he calls it, those long-term decisions for the country. But here in Stoke-on-Trent North, the jury's still very much out on that one.
Yes, and in Stoke-on-Trent North, the MP Jonathan Gullis is very outspoken on issues to do with immigration, issues to do with illegal immigration. He's campaigned on the use of hotels for migrants and refugees coming over the channel. Do you hear those sorts of concerns when you've been out and about in the area?
Yeah, stop the boats, and stopping the boats is certainly something that has come up repeatedly. They just don't feel like there's enough action. There's a lot of, they felt like that while Suella Braverman was maybe talking and saying the right things to them and their beliefs, the lack of action and the lack of, you know, still having those boats come across was certainly something which they felt, well, you know, maybe on that point, you know, her being sacked was maybe the right thing, and they do, those people particularly that were talking about those issues do hope that someone like James Cleverly can actually get a hold of this thing, because here in this constituency that will be one of those key battlegrounds going forward.
OK, Jack Carson in the Red Wall seat of Stoke-on-Trent, thank you very much.
Very difficult to know. It's quite interesting looking at that first woman. I don't think she really was thinking too much about the reshuffle, was she? How much cut through do these types of events have? I think everyone will have heard that Suella Braverman has been sacked and that David Cameron is back in, but the minor moves.
I think it takes us back to what Liam Halligan was saying yesterday, our business and economics editor, is that it's about how much money people have got in their pockets. And actually, it's the autumn statement next week that could be crucial, more than this cabinet reshuffle. We shall see. Yes, looking forward to hearing from Liam Halligan, because after this short break, we're going to be hearing about how UK wages have outpaced inflation at the fastest rate in 2 years. Liam Halligan, our business and economics editor, will be with us to tell us how that might impact the pound in your pocket.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political budgets.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Welcome back. Good to have you with us on GB News Live. Should we talk about the economy? Because official figures a little earlier show that UK average wages outstripping out inflation at the fastest pace for 2 years.
Yes, this comes as Labour forces a Commons vote today. They're aiming to create legal safeguards against fiscal decisions. This is following former Prime Minister Liz Truss's mini-budget. They say these changes could prevent what happened, the disaster, they say, after Liz Truss's mini-budget. So joining us now is Liam Halligan, who is, of course, GB News' economics and business editor with On the Money.
Just explain for us, Liam, then, what this vote is that Labour are trying to push through.
OK, let's do that first. So Labour, they want to empower the Office for Budget Responsibility. The Office for Budget Responsibility is a kind of Whitehall fiscal watchdog. And some people would say that in recent years they've been overly pessimistic about the economy. They've overestimated how much money the government's going to spend. They've underestimated tax revenues. And they've actually sort of held a veto over government policy. If the OBR says those tax cuts are unfunded or we can't afford them, then you're not allowed to do them. And Liz Truss pushed back against that. She felt that these faceless Whitehall mandarins had become too powerful. And Labour is going in the other direction because, as Emily said, we can discuss why it happened, but after Liz Truss's mini-budget, financial markets took umbrage and interest rates went up. I mean, they're going up around the world anyway, but Labour have always tried to say that Liz Truss crashed the economy. The reality is somewhat more complex, as reality often is, but Labour, for now, they're trying to present themselves, Pip, as more responsible with the economy than the Tories. We won't spend too much money. We won't lead to interest rates going up. And it's pretty...
Historically, that's quite questionable.
It is quite questionable. You know, I mean, crikey, I remember writing in my economics A-level about the UK economy going cap in hand to the International Monetary Fund. It was our economic Suez under a Labour government. On the other hand, you know, for a lot of the Blair-Brown years, the economy was pretty stable. The Tories in the early 90s oversaw, you know, falling out the exchange rate mechanism. So you pay your money and you take your choice.
Liam, it's quite clear why...
They go, Ofcom will like that one, won't they? Because I was very balanced.
It's quite clear why Rachel Reeves and co want to do this, to show that they are fiscally prudent and different from the Truss administration, and it's been a big line for them that Liz Truss crashed the economy.
Yeah.
But might they come to regret handing the OBR so much power?
I think they might, because the OBR, you know, it's ferociously independent and it's often wrong. You know, forecasts are not destiny, particularly forecasts that emanate from Whitehall. In my experience as an economist, they're often, you know, among the worst forecasters in the country. The boys and girls in the City of London, where there's, you know, private money on the line, tend to do a little bit better. But let's just have a look at where the economy is, because this is a big moment. We've got the inflation number coming out tomorrow, and we've had these wage numbers out this morning that are worth just running our eyes across. So between July and September, compared to July and September in 2022, wages were 7.9% higher on average. That includes bonuses. So for a lot of people, their wage increase, if they got one at all, was a lot less than that. But the average wage increase was 7.9%, and that's higher than inflation. The latest inflation number is 6.7%. So what does that mean? That means real wages after an inflation are actually going up, and they're going up at their fastest pace in 2 years now. And that's good news for the economy, as long as it doesn't feed into inflation. But that means retail sales should pick up. Consumers should start feeling a little bit more confident, particularly if interest rates stay where they are. That will depend on tomorrow's inflation number. But just a little sting in the tail here. I wanted to put this in. I found some numbers showing that there are 2,315 insolvencies in England and Wales last month, and that's up 18% on October 2022. So that's what happens, Emily and Pip, when you increase interest rates 14 times in a row.
Yeah.
Because, of course, firms, they have debts too. They have firms' debts are generally on variable rates rather than fixed rates. Most mortgages now, 80% of mortgages are fixed rates. They're not always fixed for very long. But firms generally variable rate finance. And I just put that little thing in there. I don't want to sort of spread bad news, but it's worth noting that insolvencies are up 18% on this time last year, because the rubber's really hitting the road now. So please, Bank of England, no more interest rate rises.
Do you have any breakdown on those wage increases? I've read that quite a lot of this might be coming from the public sector with recent settlements.
Now, in general, as many commentators like to put out, in recent years, private sector wages have gone up more than public sector wages. But in this case, you're right. Part of the increase in this wage number is because of one-off payments to civil servants and people in the NHS, sort of sweeteners, if you like. It's also worth saying, Emily, and this is very rarely said on television, even though private sector wages have tended to go up more than public sector wages in recent years, the average public sector wage is still higher than the average private sector wage.
That's still true.
And as well as getting a higher wage on average, the fifth of people that work in the public sector, of course, they get much better pension rights, more holidays, more sick leave, better employment conditions, yada, yada, yada. So this is a relatively large increase in the average wage. And thankfully, for once, it's above inflation. So real wages are now going up. So people, on average, should be feeling better off. You've got to take your good news where you can get it.
Yes.
Liz Truss, you mentioned, and she has been seen today because her alternative budget is being published. What is in that? She's not going anywhere, Liz Truss, and whatever you think of her, she really is moving the needle in terms of the political debate. Even Labour now are saying our first priority is going for growth, which is exactly what Liz Truss was saying this time last year. There is a bunch now of 50 to 60 Tory backbenchers. They're called the Growth and Enterprise Group. They're very much focused around not Liz Truss as a potential leader, but Liz Truss as somebody who has ideas about how the economy should be run. This is the Tory right. This is free market, low tax, low regulation. Let's act like traditional Conservatives. Many of these people think that Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt in particular aren't traditional Conservatives, given that the tax burden is at a 70-year high. And the manifesto that Liz Truss has laid out today, she's got a bunch of international economists working with her, 12. They're a pretty impressive group. I've met many of them. They've laid out a number of measures when it comes to shaking up the planning system, lowering business taxation, what we call full expensing, which is something Jeremy Hunt might do in his autumn statement next week. That's when companies can offset all their investment 100% against their corporation tax bill. Now, that's great if you're a big company with deep pockets and you've got money to invest, or you can borrow money. If you're a small company that can't access financial markets, that hasn't got money to invest, just trying to keep your head above water, it's very difficult to take advantage of tax allowances on investment.
Doesn't help the upfront costs.
Absolutely. You still got to pay the tax, right? You still got to pay this 25% corporation tax, up from 19% this time last year. That's hurting a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises.
And that's if you're making a profit.
And that's if you're making a profit.
Insolvencies, some people certainly are not.
Liam, thank you
Pleasure.
for now. I want to bring you some breaking news about Russell Brand because 2 further complainants have come forward to the BBC since it launched a review into his behaviour. That has come in the last few moments from the corporation. A total of 5 complaints have now been made about Russell Brand's behaviour while he hosted radio shows between 2006 and 2008. The 2 complaints that we've just mentioned are related to his workplace conduct and are not, say the BBC, of a serious sexual nature. The other 3 allegations were made before he was publicly accused in September of rape and sexual assault, allegations which he denies.
So there we go. We'll bring you any updates on that one. But still to come, the latest on Storm Debi, which hit the south coast with heavy rain and thunderstorms. We'll be speaking to our man on the ground, Jeff Moody.
Well, he might have taken off in this wind.
He might have taken off with his umbrella.
First, let's get your news headlines with Sophia.
It's 12:31. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Rishi Sunak is holding talks with Met Police Chief Sir Mark Rowley over last weekend's pro-Palestinian demonstrations in the capital. The Prime Minister's spokesman says he will be speaking to Sir Mark to get a shared understanding of how to approach these protests if it were to continue in the future. It's after Suella Braverman was sacked as Home Secretary for branding pro-Palestinian protesters hate marchers. She also accused the police of bias for letting the rally go ahead on Armistice Day. The Prime Minister says his new cabinet is the team to make big, bold decisions to drive change. He addressed his new cabinet for the first time after his dramatic reshuffle, which saw David Cameron make an unexpected return to frontline politics. In a major gamble, Rishi Sunak gave the former Prime Minister a peerage in order to make him Foreign Secretary. Palestinians trapped inside Gaza's biggest hospital are digging a mass grave to bury hundreds of patients who have died since the conflict began. The hospital, besieged by Israeli forces, is no longer functioning with insufficient electricity, water and other basics. Israel has accused Hamas of having a command and control centre under the hospital, which the terror group denies. A 41-gun salute has been held in central London to mark King Charles's 75th birthday. Charles will officially launch the Coronation Food Project with the Queen, which aims to bridge the gap between food waste and food need. The King's birthday plans will also see him hosting a reception for NHS nurses and midwives at Buckingham Palace. Ceremonial gun salutes are marking the day, including at the Tower of London. And you can get more on all those stories by visiting our website at gbnews.com.
Hello, very good day to you. It's Alex Burkill here again with your latest GB News weather forecast. The unsettled picture continues through the next few days. There will be heavy rain at times and some strong blustery winds. At the moment, there are a few occluded fronts across the UK, and these bring the focus for the showery rain that we're going to see as we go through the rest of the day and overnight. A cloudy picture across many northern areas, particularly across Scotland, with some heavy outbreaks of rain at times, perhaps some winteriness over the higher ground too. Some clear skies across the far north of Scotland could allow for a touch of frost here. Elsewhere further south, also some clear skies. Temperatures not dropping a huge amount and a few showers to watch out for as well. As we go into Wednesday, a cloudy, wet story across many northern areas. Still some heavier outbreaks of rain possible here. Drier and brighter towards the south, just 1 or 2 showers to watch out for across parts of Wales and southwest England. Also some decent sunshine across the far north of Scotland too. Temperatures for many likely to be down a degree or so compared to today. We're looking at highs of around 12, possibly 13 Celsius in the south and southwest. As we go into Thursday, and we are going to see a swathe of wet and windy weather pushing its way up from the southwest. We could see gales, perhaps even a bit stronger than that around coastal parts, and some significant rainfall too. More unsettled weather to come as we head towards the weekend, with some heavy rain likely then, but we are also going to see temperatures rising as well. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.
I
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political budgets.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Live. Now, what is the weather like where you are today? If you live in the south, it's probably a little bit stormy because of Storm Debi, which has affected areas, bringing heavy rain, thunderstorms and possible flooding.
Yes, the Met Office put a yellow weather warning in place for this morning. Travel disruption expected throughout the day. We've sent GB News South West of England reporter off to do his duty, Jeff Moody. He's in North Devon. Battling the conditions? Doesn't look like it.
Oh, it's really quite pleasant, actually. Thank you for this gig. It's been very nice. But the main problem was overnight. Overnight, we did see quite some very, very strong winds, very, very strong rain, particularly in Ireland, Northern Ireland and parts of Scotland too, and in parts of the north of Wales. We did hear that there's only been 1 injury so far from this storm. That was a woman in Limerick who was hit by flying debris and was sent to hospital, but she's not in a serious condition. So really it has been very, very lucky. The storm has moved now out into the North Sea. There was a yellow weather warning in place for the south of England for flooding, particularly local localised flooding in places, but that was lifted at midday. So really, the worst of the storm is over and done with. Some people had a bad night. Originally in Ireland, there were 100,000 homes this morning without electricity. That was quickly sorted out. They're now back, all now back on grid. It looks like things are pretty much back to normal.
Jeff, I can just see actually the Met Office in the last few minutes has extended that yellow weather warning. It is now in place until 3 o'clock. Warnings of heavy rain, thunder and possibly gusty winds. But like you say, where you are, it's clearly moved through. I mean, you may as well go and have an ice cream.
Yes, absolutely. A cup of warm soup, I think, is more appropriate.
Yes, I think we're getting it in London now. Lots of rain, wind, but nothing too disastrous, it doesn't look like. Thank you very much indeed, Jeff Moody, who is in North Devon. Not so much battling the conditions, but certainly reporting on what was the case overnight and thousands of homes without power.
Yes, do take care, though, because of there could be damage to a few buildings and structures because of this stormy weather. Lightning strikes are possible, say the Met Office, and driving conditions could be a bit dodgy as well. So do watch how you go. Now, let's take you straight to the House of Commons, because the Shadow Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, is speaking about the war between Israel and Gaza. Let's listen in and hear what he has to say.
Gaza, this House needs government accountability more than ever. So will the Minister commit to working closely with the Speaker to ensure the opposition and all members of Parliament can hold the Foreign Secretary to account? Turning to the horrors of Gaza, more than 11,000 Palestinians have reportedly been killed, with 2/3 of the dead being women and children. This is shocking and devastating. Every civilian death is an equal tragedy. Does the Minister agree with me that the number of Palestinian civilians and children who have been killed over the past month is intolerable? And does he agree that Israel must make changes to the way it is fighting this war by taking urgent, concrete steps to protect civilian life? I'm gravely concerned by the desperate reports from hospitals in northern Gaza. These were already overstretched with the wounded, short of fuel and filled with civilians seeking shelter. Doctors now forced to make impossible choices as they try to care for the wounded and newborns without power. Some of those newborns have now lost their lives. Unbearable. Medical establishments have special protection under international law. They should never be targeted or used as shields. All parties must follow international law, acting with necessity, distinction, proportionality and precaution. Allegations of breaches should always be treated with the utmost seriousness. I know the Minister said last week that this government supports ICC independence, as the Labour Party do, but he failed to answer whether the government recognises its jurisdiction to address the conduct of all parties in Gaza, as Prime Minister Boris Johnson rejected it and attacked the court. Labour recognises the ICC's jurisdiction. Can he clarify his government's position today? Gaza is in a humanitarian catastrophe. More than 1.5 million people have been displaced. There are desperate shortages of basic essentials. Does the Minister agree that the short pauses in the north are clearly not enough? Gazans need aid now. They need medicine now. They need water now. They need food now. They need fuel now. A full, comprehensive and immediate humanitarian pause in fighting across the whole of Gaza now, to alleviate Palestinian suffering and for Hamas terrorists to release the hostages. Mr. Speaker, Hamas' stated aim is to wipe Israel off the map. They committed the most brutal attack on Jews since the Holocaust. Now they're using innocent Palestinians as human shields. I'd like to register my shock that not every member of this House can say this truth. Hamas are terrorists. We must not give up on the narrow openings that keep the prospect of peace alive. That means preventing escalation, condemning violence from settlers in the West Bank, condemning rocking attacks on Israel from Iran's proxies in Lebanon and elsewhere, creating a future where Gaza is not subject to occupation. Meanwhile, international diplomacy evolves and the facts on the ground are changing day to day. In relation to both hostages being rescued and Hamas's capability to carry out attacks like we saw on October the 7th, as the leader of the opposition set out to Chatham House, we must move to a full cessation of fighting as quickly as possible. The reality is that neither the long-term security of Israel nor long-term justice for Palestine can be delivered by bombs and bullets. We must seek a path to a political process that leads to two states, a secure Israel and an independent Palestine. Thank you, Mr.
Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his comments. Perhaps I should start with his comments about the Foreign Secretary. I would say this to him. I think that having a former Prime Minister and party leader as our Foreign Secretary, wherever you sit in this House, that must be a plus. They will be able to exert British influence, British policy highly effectively overseas, and I greatly welcome the appointment of Lord Cameron to the position as Foreign Secretary. He is, as the House will know, an extremely experienced parliamentarian, and I have no doubt whatsoever that both the House and the Foreign Office and the government will gain enormously from his presence. He asked me, Mr. Speaker, whether I will commit to working very closely with you, and of course there is only one answer to that question, but also to ensure also to ensure the fullest possible accountability as you set it out, Mr. Speaker. He speaks of the scale of death and misery, and all deaths of civilians are to be profoundly regretted. He talked about the scenes from Al-Shifa Hospital, which will have shocked every single member of this House, and he, like me, will be aware that 102 humanitarian workers who placed their lives in jeopardy to support their fellow human beings, those lives have been lost. He asked me about the ICC. It's not for me to fetter or speak in the place of the chief prosecutor at the ICC, but he will know that he has spoken and that he will do so again. He called for the hostages to be released. Everyone in this House, I hope, will echo that. He said that Hamas are terrorists and suggested that some do not recognise that. I hope that I agree with him. I hope every member of the House will make it clear that Hamas are terrorists, and the dreadful pogrom that took place.
You are listening and watching International Development Minister Andrew Mitchell talk to MPs about the crisis in Israel and Gaza. He also just spoke about the new Foreign Secretary, David Cameron, who is obviously the former Prime Minister, and he says that having him on board must be a plus because he will be able to exert British influence and policy overseas. The Shadow Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, I think needed a little bit of reassurance about that.
Yes, he asked many questions indeed, mostly about the situation in Israel-Gaza, humanitarian crisis. He also emphasised that Hamas is a terrorist group. Andrew Mitchell, of course, will be taking questions for David Cameron, as David Cameron is now in the Lords, and Andrew Mitchell will take questions. So that's why he was there with David Lammy, the Shadow Foreign Secretary. But let's go live to our political correspondent, Olivia Utley, in Westminster. Olivia, thank you very much for joining us on the show. We were just listening there to a little bit of Andrew Mitchell with David Lammy. Andrew was asked about David Cameron as Foreign Secretary. He said it's a plus, must be a plus, having a former Prime Minister in the Cabinet.
Yeah, and I think that view is echoed certainly in quite large portions of Whitehall and possibly among the wider Conservative backbenchers. The Foreign Office, I've spoken to some officials at the Foreign Office who are absolutely over the moon. They think that having a former Prime Minister as Foreign Secretary will give heft to the department, will give clout to the Foreign Office. It's also quite useful for Rishi Sunak. He will very much be able to delegate matters of foreign import over to the Foreign Secretary. Previously, sometimes we've had Foreign Secretaries who sort of hold the role in name only. When an actual big breaking international story comes out, it's the Prime Minister who has to travel to the relevant place and engage in diplomacy. Now, David Cameron will very much be able to do that on Rishi Sunak's behalf. He has the international contacts, he has the reputation, he has the gravitas, as it were, on the world stage. That said, it's a pretty controversial appointment. Yes, there are plenty of moderates in the Conservative Party, perhaps on the left of the party, who are really happy about the news, partly for the reasons I've just mentioned, partly because they feel that the grown-ups are back in charge. That's a phrase I've been hearing a lot in Westminster today. But there are those on the right of the party, plenty of MPs in red wall seats, who feel as though they've been betrayed. They think that Suella Braverman spoke for them. She's now gone, and she's essentially been replaced by the man who was the king of Remain, if you like, the Prime Minister who led the Remain campaign over the course of that Brexit referendum. At the moment, on the whole, they're being pretty quiet. Andrea Jenkins has sent in a letter of no confidence, but she tends to be a little bit of a troublemaker, and she's not a sort of Pied Piper in the Conservative Party. I don't think hordes will follow her sending letters of no confidence to Rishi Sunak. But that anger is still there, muted though it might be. Suella Braverman, you'll notice, has withheld her resignation letter. We haven't yet heard anything from her. Allies say that's because she wants it to be as explosive as possible. And while the airwaves are dominated with David Cameron, she just doesn't think she'll get enough attention. It could be that in a few days or maybe weeks, she'll release that statement, and those sort of 40 or 50 Conservative MPs who staunchly back her, who backed her in the leadership contest, who've praised her in her role as Home Secretary, could start kicking their toys out of the pram too. So Rishi Sunak, although this morning we're seeing a united front, we're not hearing too many mutterings from the Conservative backbenchers, he has a lot of problems ahead of him.
I'm just wondering whether Suella Braverman might wait until the Supreme Court ruling on sending people to Rwanda. Depending on the outcome of that, could that be her time to make a more fulsome statement?
I think that could well be the case, but we're expecting to hear the ruling tomorrow. And I've heard insiders say that they think it's likely that the government will lose, or if not lose absolutely, then it could be some sort of fudge where elements of the policy are allowed to go ahead, but others aren't. If that is the case, I think it might well be the time that Suella Braverman speaks up. It's not clear what Rishi Sunak would do if the government loses, where he would take it next. But Suella Braverman's line would obviously be, well, we need to push ahead with this policy, we need to find a way to make it work, we need to crack down on those boats and stop illegal migration, which plenty of Conservative MPs, plenty of Conservative members and plenty of voters agree with. So as you say, she could well use that opportunity to write that letter, and at that moment we could see MPs flooding in behind her, expressing their discontent with the current Conservative government.
And just very quickly, Olivia, while we've got you, you said the appointment of David Cameron is controversial. It's also controversial for the reason that he's facing rather a lot of scrutiny over links with China, various business interests. A number of questions have gone in, I believe.
Well, absolutely, and that's a really awkward position for the Foreign Secretary to be in. David Cameron, along with George Osborne, presided over the golden era of relations between China and the UK, and that there are lots of China hawks on the Conservative backbenchers who also tend to be Brexiteers, who also tend to agree with Suella Braverman, who really don't trust David Cameron on this issue of China, which is, of course, very important for the Foreign Secretary.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much indeed. Olivia Utley there in Westminster in our studio for us. Next, we're going to be discussing the King's 75th birthday. There will be another gun salute, this time from the Tower of London. Don't go anywhere.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political budgets.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Hello, welcome back to GB News Live with me, Emily Carver and Pip Thompson. So King Charles is celebrating his 75th birthday today.
So from all of us at GB News, we're so excited we can't get our words out, but we do wish him a very happy birthday. He marks this occasion by launching his Coronation Food Project, very much a working day still for the King. The project is helping protect people against food poverty.
Yes, earlier at 12 we had the 41 gun salute in Green Park, and in just a few moments we'll bring you the 62 gun salute live at the Tower of London to mark this milestone.
We're joined by former BBC correspondent Michael Cole to help us celebrate. Good afternoon to you, Michael. Just explain to us why it's a 62 royal gun salute this afternoon at 1 o'clock.
Well, good afternoon to you. And of course, a happy birthday to His Majesty. Well, I think they're just 3/4 of a century is quite an achievement. And I think they're pulling out all the stops and firing all the guns at the Tower of London to make it a very special one for His Majesty the King. I mean, I've been observing him throughout his whole life. I remember my mother saying to me when I was 5 years old, Princess Elizabeth has just had a baby. I thought, well, that was very interesting. I've been paying attention since the age of 4. And I've never seen him look so happy. In the past, he's been querulous at times, angry at times, frustrated at times. And of course, Princess Diana did say in that famous interview, or infamous interview, that the top job would place limitations upon her husband if he took it. But I think having
Michael,
fulfilled...
just hold
Yes,
that thought while we listen in and watch that royal gun salute. Happy birthday, King Charles. And listen to a 62-round royal gun salute at the Tower of London by the Honorary Artillery Company on the occasion of King Charles's 75th birthday. Happy birthday, King Charles. And helping us celebrate all this is Michael Cole, royal commentator. Michael, I did ask you to pause your thoughts for very good reason there, so we could just take in those pictures and hear that. But continue your thoughts about King Charles on this special occasion. Oh, Michael, I think you might... Oh, no, we've got you back. Sorry. Rewind that thought for us.
I was just saying, that was a wonderful scene, wasn't it? Of course, that fantastic fusillade. I think that Southwark and the whole of the South Bank probably surrendered by now, put up the white flag, because that's the Royal Artillery Company. They are historically the oldest unit in the British Army, going way back to Henry VIII, I believe. And they're all made up of mainly city boys. It's a territorial army unit, and to get into that unit, you have to be very, very special indeed. So captains of industry have to start as privates and work their way up. So this is a tremendous prestige for them, and I'm quite sure a great deal of fun firing off all that cordite for the general entertainment of the public. And of course, it's a great day. 75 years is not nothing. It's 3/4 of a century. The king has seen a great deal. And in his new reign, he's done extraordinarily well. The 2 state visits to France and Germany, and of course the visit recently to Kenya, the first to a Commonwealth country. And he seems to be growing into the role. He waited a long, long time, of course, the longest apprenticeship in history. And of course, it's compared with his mother's record-breaking reign, it's going to be a short reign. But a short reign can be terribly successful. His great-great-grandfather, King Edward VII, only reigned from nearly 10 years. He died in 1910, but he gave his name to the Edwardian era, which in retrospect was looked back upon as being a golden age of happiness and prosperity. I mean, I'm sure there were problems for many, many ordinary people, but it was then regarded, and still is, as a great period for this country, and gave its name to the Edwardian era. I'm not sure whether we're entering a Carolean era, but who knows? The king seems to be enjoying his job, and why not? He's waited long enough for it, and he certainly knows the ropes.
Viewpoint we have there with our live feed right up close and personal for the 62-gun salute there. Michael, what else is on the agenda today? What will the king be looking forward to?
Well, he's going to have a nice little party. It's going to be not very formal. It's going to be more friends than family at Highgrove. He had a reception there yesterday with a lot of people. Many of them were 75 years old, who sort of like his twins. From all different sections of society were there to celebrate people who've done things in the locality of Gloucestershire and further afield from organisations in which he's taken a great deal of interest over the years, and also one or two television personalities on other channels which I couldn't possibly name. They were also there. You and I, we weren't there, but nevertheless, we wished him well and hope they had a good time. So he's really, as I said to you earlier, I think I've never seen him look so happy. He was always rather doubtful, could have been bad-tempered on occasions. He gave out an air sometimes of being a man of great privilege. He wasn't really enjoying his life. And that was a great shame, I always felt. But now he's grown into the role. And the good thing is that he's following quite closely the model of his mother. He's learned a great deal during his apprenticeship. And so far, and I hope it continues, he hasn't put a foot wrong, and I think that's to be commended.
You say there, Michael, that he looks happy, but I'm sure always at the back of his mind will be his relationship with his younger son, Duke of Sussex, Prince Harry. Obviously, we don't know exactly what's going on there, but there's been a lot of talk today as to whether Prince Harry will telephone him, whether they might speak, whether he'll wish him happy birthday.
Yeah, you've got to say, never say never. It's a family. They will have to come together at some stage. I think at the moment, things are too raw. It's going to be very, very difficult. In particular, where he's fallen out with his older brother, William. That is a great shame because it's awful. One of the worst things you can ever see is brothers fighting each other. And of course, their late mother, much Miss Diana, would be mortified. Well, she is mortified, unfortunately. She's dead, but she would be so upset to see her sons at loggerheads with each other when she always felt they would be together, back each other in all circumstances and be for each other. But I'm quite sure that the king would welcome a call from his younger son, and perhaps that will happen. I would like to think that there would be reconciliation, but there's a lot of fence mending to be done, a lot of humble pie to be eaten by the California too, because what they've done is, I think, unthinkable. Most men can put up with being insulted. My goodness, I've been insulted by experts. But what men do not like and cannot bear is to have their wives, who are closest to them, insulted. And that's what happened. Meghan and Harry both went out of their way in their films and in his book, Spare, to say unkind and unwanted things about Camilla, Queen now, and the Princess of Wales, Kate Middleton. And that, I think, is going to take some time to get over. Perhaps you can understand that.
But hopefully, wounds can heal. Michael Cole, former BBC correspondent, thank you very much for talking to us. And here are live pictures of the birthday boy, King Charles, on his 75th birthday.
Lovely day for it, isn't it?
Where is he this afternoon? Let me just have a look, because it is very much a working day for him. He's launching the Coronation Food Project with Queen Camilla, which aims to bridge the gap between food waste and food need. They're visiting a surplus food distribution centre just outside London, and there's lots of staff and volunteers there to greet them, and they're hearing about the ways that food waste can be used for social good. A little later on.
Duty, even on his birthday.
And he doesn't care that it's raining either, does it?
No, of course not.
A little later on, King Charles will also host a Buckingham Palace reception highlighting the work of nurses and midwives over the decades as part of the NHS's 75th celebrations. So today is 75th birthday. The oldest monarch he was on the 6th of May to be crowned. He waited more than 70 years to become king. And today, for King Charles, is very much a working day.
It's such a shame that Prince Harry isn't there. There were, of course, mixed reports. Of course, this always descends into the land of gossip and hearsay, but there were reports that he was invited to come over for the birthday celebration.
Then there were reports that he didn't know anything about it.
Exactly, and it's hard to know what exactly is true. But, of course, Prince Harry was quick to come to London when it came to his various trials and tribulations with the press. But
he did go to the King's coronation.
He did.
He stayed for the ceremony.
A flying visit.
And then he went straight back.
A flying visit.
He was there.
His Majesty the King having a lovely time in a bit of a pouring rain, but meeting many volunteers there at the food distribution centre.
Now, let's return to our top story. Former Prime Minister David Cameron returning to frontline politics 7 years after resigning as Prime Minister.
Lord Cameron attended the first meeting of Rishi Sunak's new cabinet this morning following his shock appointment as Foreign Secretary yesterday.
Rishi Sunak, the current Prime Minister, is stressing the importance of building a united team after his dramatic reshuffle yesterday. But to do that, he's going to have to fight off some MPs on the right of the party who are said to be furious over the sacking of Suella Braverman as Home Secretary.
Our political correspondent, Catherine Forster, is in Downing Street for us. Catherine, how many MPs are furious at Suella Braverman's sacking?
Well, certainly, there's quite a number on the right of the party that are really very unhappy indeed. They believe that Suella Braverman spoke not just for them, but for millions of people up and down the country. She didn't mince her words. You knew where you were with her. They feel that Rishi Sunak has made a fundamental misstep in getting rid of her and that they will be punished when it comes to a general election. But I have to say, there's plenty of others within the Conservative Party that are really rather happy with this reshuffle. Certainly, it seems to be a tilt back towards the centre. The One Nation group of Conservatives in particular feel that this is much more the place they need to be with a general election approaching. Now, we know that Andrea Jenkins, the MP and great Boris Johnson supporter, MP for Morley, did put in a no-confidence letter to Sir Graham Brady yesterday. We don't know. There may be others. I think it, well, to be honest, don't quote me on this, famous last words, inconceivable, though, that they would reach the threshold to have another leadership challenge to depose Rishi Sunak before the next election. But, of course, things change very fast in politics. But certainly the faces going into cabinet, all smiles, as you would expect. A lot of people thrilled to bits to be there. David Cameron, of course, more than anyone, particularly 7 years after he left number 10, back now with one of the biggest jobs. People at the Foreign Office seem to be very happy. Obviously, he carries a lot of clout. He's already had a phone call with Antony Blinken, his US counterpart, about the situation in the Middle East and Ukraine. Another big appointment, Victoria Atkins. OK, she's not well known to many people, but she has replaced Steve Barclay in health. Now, of course, to most people going to be voting in the general election, the biggest issues are the cost of living crisis, paying their bills, feeling better off or worse off, and the state of the National Health Service. Can they get a doctor? Can they get an appointment? How long do they have to wait? So Victoria Atkins, she's come from number 3 in the Treasury. This is a big promotion for her. She's been an MP since 2015. But that will prove potentially to be very significant. But Steve Barclay, who's now gone to Environment, didn't manage to break the deadlock with the doctor strikes. Those are still going on. The waiting list, one of Rishi Sunak's 5 pledges to get those down, are yet again at a record high. So if, and it's a big if, Victoria Atkins can succeed where Steve Barclay has failed, that would be a big result and might help them in the polls. But certainly Rishi Sunak has remade the cabinet in his own image. It's more of what he wants. Obviously, he'd had to put up with Suella Braverman, who had been appointed under Liz Truss. He needed her because she supported him to get the leadership, but he was more and more fed up with some of the language she used, if not the fundamental policies. So they've got rid of her, they've risked alienating the right, but Rishi Sunak obviously feels this is a chance he's got to take. He's had a lot of criticism for being cautious. I think nobody could dispute that this reshuffle is nothing if not bold.
There's a new party chairman as well, isn't there, Catherine? Richard Holden, who was doing the rounds this morning, very much trying to play down any tensions there might be within the party, saying that the Conservative Party is a broad church, he called it.
Yes, of course, and the Conservative Party is very much a coalition of various different factions, as indeed is any political party. But Richard Holden, he's an interesting choice. This is a big promotion for him. He was Transport Minister when he got out of bed yesterday. Now he's chair of the Conservative Party. He's a Red Wall MP. He only came in 2019. He worked as a special advisor here. And I think the reason Rishi Sunak has chosen him over Greg Hands, who of course was very, very experienced, is he's from the north. He understands the Red Wall. He represents that sort of voter. And of course, although the appeal of David Cameron to many will perhaps be people down south, people that might be flirting with voting with the Lib Dems, they've also got to think about voters in the Red Wall. And I think that's where Richard Holden comes in. So, yes, but I mean, one interesting problem for him, the seat that he currently represents is disappearing because of boundary changes. So he currently doesn't even have a seat in the next election. I suspect one will be found for him, though, pretty sharply.
That cabinet meeting earlier, there was obviously so much to be discussed, but one of the things is the Supreme Court's ruling on Rwanda asylum policy tomorrow. Now, lines coming out of this cabinet meeting is that Cabinet ministers war-gamed how to respond if the Supreme Court rules against the government. They've been looking at possible outcomes and what contingency measures there might be.
Yes, that's right. The judgment due tomorrow morning. It's been long awaited. The success or otherwise of Rishi Sunak's priority in stopping the boats hangs on it. So yes, and the chap who was Foreign Secretary yesterday morning and is now Home Secretary, James Cleverly, has had to get to grips with this all very quickly. He was updating the cabinet on progress that was being made, returns agreements with Albania and Georgia. But yes, they're looking at all possible scenarios. They're playing down expectations that they're going to win. They don't know how it's going to go. It's possible that there may not be a clear, yes, you can send people to Rwanda, or no, you can't, that it may be some sort of middle ground, but they've obviously got to be ready with a plan, whatever the judgment is. And I think we can safely say that if Suella Braverman had still been Home Secretary tomorrow and the judgment goes flatly against the government, at that point she would be calling for the United Kingdom to withdraw from the European Convention on Human Rights. Now, Rishi Sunak's made it pretty plain he doesn't want to do that. And James Cleverly, the new Home Secretary, has taken a much softer line on that too, has made it clear previously that he doesn't think that's necessary. But this is a huge, huge moment for the government tomorrow. This, inflation figures, will he meet his target? It's widely expected that he will. And then the autumn statement. So we've had a huge reshuffle, but several other big key events for Rishi Sunak coming up in the coming days.
Political correspondent Catherine Forster, thank you.
Yes, so joining us now is Jack Carson, who's in the Red Wall seat of Stoke-on-Trent today. Jack, thank you very much indeed. What are people saying where you are?
Well, it's certainly a mixed reaction to, of course, that reshuffle yesterday with the likes of David Cameron, of course, coming back into cabinet. But I think it just shows how divided constituencies like here, like Stoke-on-Trent North, here where I am today in Burslem. I think it just shows how divided this place still really is, because I've had a lot of mixed feelings, particularly around that they feel like the promises that, of course, the likes of Boris Johnson back in 2019, when this seat went from Labour to Conservative, the promises that Boris made, particularly around Brexit, of course, immigration policy as well, that of course Rishi Sunak is now driving. They feel like a lot of those promises haven't been met, and so they are toying with the idea of going back to Labour. As one voter did tell me that he lent his vote to the Conservatives, and he said never again. He felt like his promises haven't been delivered, and that is going to be the problem for Rishi Sunak over the next coming months as we head ever closer towards a general election, convincing voters in red wall seats like this that he is the man that they can trust, that Keir Starmer isn't Keir Starmer in the Labour Party isn't the choice really that voters here should be going back to. But of course Labour have come out particularly strongly, of course, on the appointment of David Cameron to Foreign Secretary, the Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury. On GBNews earlier today, Darren Jones said that having David Cameron as Foreign Secretary doesn't solve Rishi Sunak's problems. He said that he's been hiring, looks like hiring a grown-up to try and control the party, and coming across as a united party, of course, is something that Rishi Sunak today particularly is trying to put across. He's saying that they're in that cabinet meeting that they're trying to make those big, bold decisions, and the idea that David Cameron is now Foreign Secretary again hasn't necessarily gone down greatly here overall, I would say, particularly the fact that he has, of course, been made a peer to, of course, hold that position. There was one voter that told me that he was surprised that there was no other MP within the Conservative Party, within that governing party, that could take that job and, of course, represent the UK, having already, of course, been elected to the House of Commons. But on whether Rishi Sunak can still win here and the reaction to that reshuffle yesterday, here's what a couple of people told me.
Rishi Sunak, I don't think so. I don't know, maybe Labour.
It was a surprise, didn't expect it at all, but I'm confident he's very experienced and I think he'll do a good job. I think he will, yeah, I'm sure he will. Conservative, always have.
Yes, it just shows how mixed maybe people still are here in this constituency. I mean, there was still definitely shock that Suella Braverman was sacked, but one voter did tell me that, of course, he agreed with a lot of what she was saying, but besides, of course, from the specific reasons we know that she was sacked regarding that, of course, article and some of her comments that she's made over the past few weeks, they said that she talked a lot of good talk around stopping the boats and you know, sorting out the big problem, of course, down on the coast of Dover, but actually the lack of action is disappointing here, particularly, of course, around those promises that were made in 2019 around that Brexit election, about sorting out immigration. Lots of people feel let down by the Conservatives that they haven't sorted that problem. That will be a problem for Rishi Sunak coming here in the next few months.
Thank you very much indeed, Jack Carson there in Stoke-on-Trent, bringing us the reaction from the Red Wall to the reshuffle.
Stay with us here on GB News Live. The murder of 2-year-old James Bulger in 1993. So many of us remember that. Well, there is a parole hearing taking place for John Venables. He is one of those that was sentenced for James's murder, was found guilty of his killing. We'll bring you that update very shortly. Stay with us.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Akweer, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Live with Emily Carver and Pip Thompson. Now, it was, as I'm sure many of you remember, a shocking child murder in the UK. 2-year-old toddler James Bulger snatched from a shopping centre in Merseyside, brutally murdered by 2 10-year-old boys. Now, one of the killers, John Venables, who you're looking at now, has a parole hearing which started today. And James Bulger's mother is urging the parole board not to release him. Understandable. Let's bring in our reporter Ray Addison for more. A 2-day hearing, Ray, taking place behind closed doors.
Yeah, and there's a real chance now that John Venables, who is a child killer and a twice convicted paedophile, could be back on our streets before Christmas if the parole board decide that he is a manageable risk to the public or not a risk at all. He could be released.
What was his sentence originally?
So, obviously, this all happened back in 1993. He was sentenced to life, but he was released after 8 years, as was Robert Thompson.
That's Robert Thompson,
That's Robert Thompson there.
John Venables
on the
is the... Right.
That's the shopping centre in Bootle in Merseyside, where
you can see James Bulger being lured away at the bottom of that
Absolutely.
photograph.
He was snatched. He was taken to a railway track by those 2 boys. He was tortured. He was murdered. And his body was found 2 days later.
I was so young, well, I say young, not that young, but I remember it so well across all the front pages. It was so brutal what happened to that little lad.
Absolutely the same. I think I was in my teenage years, and it was absolutely horrific. I remember following the case. I remember that feeling of horror at the thought that a child could be taken in that way, and then the weight to see what had happened to him, and then obviously that horrific discovery and the realisation, and then to realise that two children, two 10-year-old boys who should be innocent and had done that and gone to that dark place, horrific, absolutely horrific.
And the other boy who perpetrated this horrific murder of this 2-year-old, James Bulger, he's been living his life under a new identity. He served his time for the original crime and he's living as normal.
Yeah, they were both released in 2001. Robert Thompson, as far as we know, has gone on to have a fairly ordinary life. He hasn't got back in trouble with the police, certainly hasn't come to the attention of the press. However, John Venables is a completely different story. He ended up going back to prison in 2010 after indecent images of children were found on his computer. He served 3 years, was released, and then, of course, went back again in 2017, recalled to prison when again indecent images were found on his computer.
James Bulger's mother, Denise, she has pleaded for him not to be released. Does her opinion, or can her opinion, carry any weight here with the parole board?
Well, the parole board are going to consider a number of factors. They're going to look for evidence of behavioural change. So, yes, they're going to look at the past, the present and what the future might hold. They're going to look at the impact that it's had on the victims. Some viewers, listeners might say, alarmingly, they're not allowed to be present at the hearing and give evidence in person, but both parents have issued impact statements, and they will certainly be taken into consideration. But however, they're going to be looking specifically at this most recent offence and where they think he will go from here, whether he still poses a risk.
And Venables is desperate to get out before a change in the law, I understand.
Yeah, so we've got this Victims and Prisoners Bill. We heard about it in the King's speech recently. It's going to be going through Parliament. Now, that will give ministers the opportunity to block controversial parole board releases if they feel that the wrong decision has been made. And so, from Venables' point of view, he's desperate to have this hearing and to be allowed out before that ability is removed from the parole board, who's perhaps more likely to say, yes, OK, let's give him another chance, than a politician.
2-day hearing. When can we expect a decision?
A decision's going to take at least 14 days. Who knows whether it might take slightly longer than normal in this situation because it's such a high-profile case and there's so much evidence to go through. But, like I said at the beginning, there is a real chance he could be out before Christmas if they decide he's no longer a risk.
I imagine the court of public opinion would be quite clear on this one. But we await to hear what the decision will be. Very interesting indeed with that change of law coming.
Absolutely, yeah. It remains to be seen exactly what happens.
Ray, thank you for explaining all that. Thank you. Lots more here to come on GB News Live. First, your headlines with Sophia.
It's 1:32. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Rishi Sunak is holding talks with the Met Police Chief Sir Mark Rowley over the last weekend's pro-Palestinian demonstrations in the capital. The Prime Minister's spokesman says he is speaking to Sir Mark to get a shared understanding of how to approach these protests if they were to continue in the future. It's after Suella Braverman was sacked as Home Secretary for branding pro-Palestinian protesters hate marchers. She also accused the police of bias for letting the rally go ahead on Armistice Day. The Prime Minister says his new cabinet is the team to make big, bold decisions to drive change. He addressed his new cabinet for the first time after his dramatic reshuffle, which saw David Cameron make an unexpected return to frontline politics. In a major gamble, Rishi Sunak gave the former Prime Minister a peerage in order to make him Foreign Secretary. Lord Cameron admits such return is not usual, but says he wants to support Mr Sunak through a difficult job at a hard time. The Prime Minister addressed his cabinet and pledged to change the country for the better. 2 further complainants have come forward to the BBC since it launched a review into behaviour of Russell Brand. The BBC says the nature of the allegations are not specified. The investigation now indicates a total of 5 complaints directly to the corporation. It added there was no disciplinary action taken against the comedian during his time with the company. A 62-gun salute has fired at the Tower of London to mark King Charles's 75th birthday. Charles is launching the Coronation Food Project with the Queen, which aims to bridge the gap between food waste and food need. The King's birthday plans will also see him hosting a reception for NHS nurses and midwives at Buckingham Palace. Ceremonial gun salutes have marked the day, including at the Tower of London. And you can get more on all those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2293 and €1.1465. The price of gold is £1,582 and 83 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,396 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political budgets.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Welcome back. UK average wages outstripped inflation at the fastest pace for 2 years. That's according to the latest figures from the Office for National Statistics.
Yes, this comes as former Prime Minister Liz Truss outlines her Growth Commission today, providing an alternative budget, including reforms to corporation tax, income tax and national spending.
Joining us now to talk about all this is Liam Halligan, GB News' economics and business editor with On the Money. Hi, Liam. So, Liz Truss's alternative budget, is it likely to be widely listened to?
It will certainly be very closely scrutinised in Westminster because Liz Truss is at the heart of a group of now 60-odd Tory MPs, the pro-growth and enterprise group they are. It's an informal group, but they're saying that unless Jeremy Hunt, in his autumn statement next week, avoids raising taxes, then they're not going to vote for his autumn statement. And that's a really big deal for a government. If they can't get their autumn statement through the House of Commons, then it's a no-confidence issue. So Liz Truss's manifesto for growth, if you like, will be quite closely looked at. She's still got a lot of people in the City of London that follow closely what she's doing. She doesn't want to be the next Tory leader, but she does want to put forward what she sees as truly conservative ideas about loosening up the planning system so we can build more homes, about lowering regulation, about lowering, in particular, business taxation, getting corporation tax back down to 19% compared to 25%, which is where it went late last year. And look, this is the problem that Jeremy Hunt knows is there, and that's why if we are going to get any kind of signal from Jeremy Hunt about tax cuts next Thursday in his autumn statement, the 22nd of November, it will be business taxation. I don't think it will be personal taxation. I don't think it will be income tax or national insurance. It will be reductions in business taxation, in particular something called full expensing. So if a business invests money, they can offset that investment against their corporation tax bill. It sounds complicated, but for a lot of firms, this will be manna from heaven to extend that full expensing regime for another few years in order to try and get the economy moving.
Yes, because so far, Jeremy Hunt has very much stuck to the line that in order to bring down inflation, he can't be giving away any tax cuts.
And as a result, Emily, tax has spiralled now. It's going to be the highest tax burden, tax as a share of national income, the entire economy, the highest for 70 years, which is hardly a conservative outcome in the eyes of many Tory MPs. But look, there is some good news here for the Chancellor and the Prime Minister to get their teeth into ahead of tomorrow's inflation number. I'm going to be here at 7 o'clock in the morning tomorrow reporting on that inflation number. It's going to be quite a big deal. But before that, there's some good news, and it's in the form of wages. Let's have a look at the wage data. So between July and September, Emily and Pip, wages were 7.9% higher than they were in the same period in 2022. That's the average wage rise. Now, some people will be screaming at the telly and radio, oh, I didn't get a pay rise. That's because this is the average. Some people got more, some people got less, but that's the average. And that's higher, interestingly, than the September inflation number, which was 6.7%, quite a lot higher. And that means real wages allowing for inflation, have gone up, and they've gone up at their fastest pace in 2 years. The gap between average wages and inflation hasn't been that wide, 1.2 percentage points for 2 years. So that's relatively good news. That should help get the economy moving, get retail sales going. Having said that, I did just want to put this little whiz-bang in there. I found these numbers on insolvency, which are out today. In England and Wales, we had 2,315 significant insolvencies of companies in October. That's 18% higher than on October 2022. So that shows that a lot of businesses, they are suffering from these 14 interest rate rises that we've had. In fact, the Bank of England said a couple of weeks ago that it thinks only about half of the impact of those 14 rate rises has yet fed through. It takes a long time for those rate rises to be expressed because mortgages are fixed and then they're not fixed and banks, change credit conditions and so on. And we reckon only about half of the impact of those 14 rate rises has come through. That's why it's good news the Bank of England didn't raise interest rates earlier this month or last month. And a lot of people think, Emily and Pip, depending on what this inflation number is tomorrow, if it is down significantly, and it may well be down from like 6.7 to about 5%, I'm predicting that now, if inflation does come down sharply, that will be it. No more interest rate rises. We can then look forward to interest rate cuts towards the middle or the end of next year, possibly in time for a general election.
Wow. And what did you say that you thought inflation might come down to? Not that I'm holding you to this.
No. So it's 6.7 now, Pip. I wrote on Sunday, actually, in my Telegraph column, that I think inflation will definitely start with a 5.
That would be quite...
And I think it could be 5 point something low. And the reason is, why do I say that? Because the Ofgem energy price cap was lowered at the beginning of October, and that has a material impact on maximum energy bills that households pay, and firms to some extent. And so that's a big reason why I think quite a lot of the inflation will drop out of these numbers. I'm not saying inflation's dead. I'm not saying we've solved it. We could easily get another energy price spike this winter, as I've often argued, for geopolitical reasons, the OPEC exporters cartel, oil cartel, maybe, other geopolitical fallout, all the ghastly violence in the Israel-Hamas conflict. The Russia-Ukraine conflict we barely mentioned, that's still going on, involving one of the biggest energy exporters in the world. So inflation could spike, but assuming that it doesn't, I reckon we're now at peak interest rates, and the next move in interest rates will be down.
Just very, very quickly, is not the price cap, the Ofgem price cap, is that not artificially lowering the price of energy?
Well, it depends on where wholesale prices come out. At the moment, the Ofgem energy price cap is containing the wholesale price increases, because wholesale prices have actually come down quite a lot. The danger is that there are many actors on the world stage that geopolitically want to do the West harm, and there are many reasons why energy prices could spike this winter. And if we have a particularly cold winter, the fact the UK hasn't got much gas storage, but also the OPEC exporters cartel and any geopolitical fallout from these conflicts. So, as ever, economics, it's very difficult to know what's going to happen, but I do think tomorrow's inflation number is going to be lower. It's clear real wages are up. 2 bits of good news, and 3 bits of good news, possibly interest rates have peaked.
Well, I hope very much that you're right. Thank you very much for your time. Liam Halligan there, our economics and business editor with On the Money.
All eyes will be on the Supreme Court tomorrow, as 5 Supreme Court justices will give their decision on the government's Rwanda plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. Many are seeing this as make or break for the government.
Yes, the court's decision could also escalate calls from some Conservative right-wingers for Britain to pull out of the European Convention of Human Rights, especially after Rishi Sunak upset some on the right of his party by sacking Suella Braverman yesterday, who was, of course, a vocal critic of the treaty.
Well, we were hoping to speak to Luke Tyrrell, who is UK Director of More in Common. Are you there, Luke? I think you are there. Good afternoon to you. Thanks for talking to us on GB News Live. How important would you say this ruling is tomorrow? Does it make the cabinet reshuffle look quite trivial?
Oh, absolutely. Cabinet reshuffles are really interesting for people like us who follow politics day to day and are very interested in it. But the truth is, most of the public aren't that interested. Tomorrow's judgment, on the other hand, on the legality of the Rwanda policy really is an important moment for the government. And it's an important moment for 2 reasons. Firstly, because we know that for quite a large swathe of voters, stopping channel crossings is one of their top priorities. But secondly, not only is it a top priority, but we know that the government have promised repeatedly to tackle those crossings. They've said, we will put them to an end. And of course, tomorrow is a key moment on whether we see whether that Rwanda policy will go ahead. And if it does go ahead, if it is legal, does it act as the deterrent that the government have promised it will do?
Yes, there's a lot of hopes pinned on this one policy. The government, with the Home Office under Suella Braverman's leadership, she said to the nation very clearly that this was the way to deter small boats from crossing. Robert Jenrick, Immigration Minister, more recently, has said the plan must go ahead, no ifs, no buts, he said. And he also said that they will do whatever it takes, essentially, I paraphrase, but whatever it takes, which may include leaving the ECHR. Is that something you suppose could happen with David Cameron now as Foreign Secretary?
I certainly think if the judgment goes against the government, there will be pressure to leave the European Court of Human Rights. But I think it would be a very risky strategy for the government. And there are two reasons for that. One is that you have to remember the coalition that elected Boris Johnson in 2019 was a very broad one. It included those new voters in places like the Red Wall, but it also included more liberal Remain voting members of the public who just couldn't stand the idea of Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister and so held their nose and voted Conservative. And the danger is that a pledge to leave the European Court of Human Rights alienates that group. There's a second factor. When we've talked to people about the idea of leaving the European Court of Human Rights, people sort of think, oh God, is this going to be a Brexit 2.0? And that fills lots of people with horror because they can remember, whether they were Remainers or Leavers, years of rows before we actually left Europe. And the thought of that happening again is really quite worrying for lots of people. So no doubt there'll be pressure, but I do not think it would be a slam dunk win for the government to run on a manifesto of leaving the court.
We are hearing that the cabinet meeting that took place earlier with the new Foreign Secretary David Cameron and the Home Secretary James Cleverly, they looked at the possible outcomes and they looked at contingency measures in case this ruling does go against the government. I mean, what sort of contingency measures do you think that could involve? Luke? Oh. I'm not sure whether we might have lost Luke. What a shame.
I was looking forward to hearing what he had to say there, because what other options are there on the table for the government?
I know.
Is this make or break when it comes to stopping the boats? Of course, there are a few prongs to their approach, not least handing lots of money to the French government, and in terms of policing and patrolling, etc., etc. But Rwanda was really the flagship policy of this government, and certainly of Suella Braverman. It will be very interesting indeed to see which way the court ruling goes. And of course, it doesn't have to be binary, as Catherine Forster was saying earlier. They could suggest tweaks to the legislation.
Yeah, it could be quite complex. And we will be attempting to dissect it all here on GB News Live tomorrow. But thank you to Luke Tyrrell. We did lose him, but thank you to Luke for giving us his thoughts. Luke is UK Director of More in Common, which is a research group.
Yes, but also in news today, King Charles is celebrating his 75th birthday today. So from all of us at GB News, we wish him a very happy birthday. He marks this occasion to launch his Coronation Food Project that's helping protect people against food poverty.
A little earlier, we had the 41-gun salute in Green Park, and at 1 o'clock, we brought you the 62-gun salute live and loud at the Tower of London. So what else is on the agenda today for King Charles? Cameron Walker, our GB News royal correspondent, is in Oxfordshire. Cameron, what are you doing there? It does sound like it's very much a working day for the King.
Yes, Pip, it may be his 75th birthday today, and he did get a few happy birthday singing renditions earlier on, but it was very much business as usual for His Majesty. As you said, he was launching the Coronation Food Project here in Oxfordshire, which is all about bridging the gap between food surplus and food poverty as well. And those million people is estimated to poverty or food insecurity across.
Oh no, it looks like we're losing Cameron Walker there. Do we have him back? No.
Can you hear me?
Cameron, are you there for us?
It might be the bad weather that's moving through today. We did see King Charles a little earlier outside that centre in Oxfordshire where Cameron is now, and it was pouring with rain, so that might have something to do with our technical hitches. But we do know that the King will later on today be hosting a Buckingham Palace reception highlighting the work of nurses and midwives over the decades as part of the NHS's 75-year celebrations. I think we might have got Cameron back. Cameron, you can continue.
Hi, Pip. Can you hear me? I can continue. Good. So Coronation Food Projects, first of all, it's going to be saving much more leftovers because new hubs are going to be created across the United Kingdom, and there's also going to be flexible funding to support the sector to reduce food waste. We had the supermarket bosses here earlier of the major supermarkets across the UK meeting His Majesty to see how this food waste can be redistributed to those in need. And you may remember last year that the King produced a personal donation as part of a £1 million fund to fund 800 commercial fridges and freezers across the UK to store all of this food waste. But this, of course, is only part one of the King's birthday today, because he's going back down to London to host a reception to thank NHS nurses and midwives who are also celebrating the 75th anniversary of the NHS. Yesterday, he was in Highgrove meeting some locals and sharing a tea party with them. But as we understand it, according to a few reports, Prince Harry, his son, is going to be making a transatlantic phone call to wish his father a happy birthday. It's being dubbed as some sort of olive branch. It's understood they haven't been on much speaking terms in recent months. They didn't even speak at the coronation, as we understand it, although Prince Harry did make the journey to attend his father's coronation. So as soon as we have more details on that phone call, we'll bring that to you. But I have been told by somebody close to Prince Harry that he was not invited to King Charles's birthday party for friends and family at Clarence House later on this evening. We are expecting His Majesty to be hosting a private reception at Clarence House for friends and family later on. So it's very much been a packed birthday, but of course it all started here at the Coronation Food Project in Oxfordshire.
Cameron Walker there, our royal correspondent, bringing us the very latest on His Majesty the King's 75th birthday celebrations.
There's plenty more to come in the next hour here on GB News Live. We'll obviously be talking about that new-looking cabinet meeting that took place a little earlier, and lots more. Don't go anywhere. Talk to you shortly.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only three people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo, there'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, it's 2 o'clock and you're with GB News Live with Pip Thompson and Emily Carver. Coming up this lunchtime.
David Cameron, he has returned to cabinet duties 7 years after resigning as Prime Minister. He attended the first meeting of Rishi Sunak's new look top team, but there are Tory battle lines with some MPs unhappy with the sacking of Suella Braverman and the direction of travel.
Is this evidence of a Hamas bunker under a Gaza hospital? Israeli troops claim to have evidence that children had been held hostage there by the militant group.
And applications open for dog owners to register their XL bully dogs before the breed is banned. We'll speak to one owner about what this means.
And the nation wishes King Charles a happy 75th birthday.
There were gun salutes at the Tower of London and Green Park, but it was pretty much business as usual for the King, who launched a project to help people facing food poverty. We'll get into all of that, but first, your news headlines with Sophia.
Good afternoon, it's 2 o'clock. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Rishi Sunak is holding talks with Met Police Chief Sir Mark Rowley over last weekend's pro-Palestinian demonstrations in the capital. The Prime Minister's spokesman says he is speaking to Sir Mark to get a shared understanding of how to approach these protests if they were to continue in the future. It's after Suella Braverman was sacked as Home Secretary for branding pro-Palestinian protesters hate marchers. She also accused the police of bias for letting the rally go ahead on Armistice Day. The Prime Minister says his new cabinet is the team to make big, bold decisions to drive change. He addressed his new cabinet for the first time after his dramatic reshuffle, which saw David Cameron make an unexpected return to frontline politics. In a major gamble, Rishi Sunak gave the former Prime Minister a peerage in order to make him Foreign Secretary. Lord Cameron admits such a return is not usual, but says he wants to support Mr Sunak through a difficult job at a hard time. The Prime Minister addressed his cabinet and pledged to change the country for the better.
I know that this strong and united team is going to deliver that change for everybody. We've got an important week coming up. On Wednesday, we'll have inflation numbers. We'll also have the Supreme Court ruling on our Rwanda plan. And next Wednesday, the Chancellor will be delivering an important autumn statement. And across all of that, I'm confident that we can demonstrate to the country that we're making progress on the priorities that I set out at the beginning of the year. And looking around this table, I know that we have an energetic and enthusiastic team that is going to deliver for the country. So let's get to work.
Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones, told GB News he thinks Rishi Sunak's move is desperate.
My observation would be that having David Cameron as Foreign Secretary doesn't solve Rishi Sunak's problems. In fact, it's quite odd to me that Rishi Sunak has had to look to the past to try to bring back a quote-unquote grown-up to help get a control of the Conservative Party. If Rishi Sunak was a good enough Prime Minister, he would be able to get a grip of this, and he's failed to do so.
Palestinians trapped inside Gaza's biggest hospital are digging a mass grave to bury hundreds of patients who have died since the conflict began. The hospital, besieged by Israeli forces, is no longer functioning with insufficient electricity, water and other basics. Israel has accused Hamas of having a command and control centre under the hospital, which the terror group denies. Foreign Office Minister Andrew Mitchell says the UK is considering using air and maritime options to get more aid into Gaza.
Hospitals, Mr. Speaker, should be places of safety, able to treat patients with compassion. It is distressing to see them unable to do so. Every civilian death is heartbreaking. It is impossible to comprehend the pain and loss that innocent Palestinians are enduring. We are focused on getting life-saving aid to those in need in Gaza.
2 further complainants have come forward to the BBC since it launched a review into the behaviour of Russell Brand. The BBC says the nature of the allegations are not specified. The investigation now indicates a total of 5 complaints directly to the corporation. It added that there was no disciplinary action taken against the comedian during his time with the company. The government is considering making chickenpox vaccines available on the NHS, following a recommendation from scientists. The Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation say the jab should be given to youngsters in 2 doses when they're 12 months and 18 months old. It says data from countries suggests the vaccine would dramatically reduce circulating chickenpox and prevent most severe cases in children. The committee has also recommended a temporary catch-up programme for older children to be included. A 62-gun salute has fired at the Tower of London to mark King Charles's 75th birthday. Charles is launching the Coronation Food Project. Charles is launching the Coronation Food Project with the Queen, which aims to bridge the gap between food waste and food need. The King's birthday plans will also see him hosting a reception for NHS nurses and midwives at Buckingham Palace. Ceremonial gun salutes have marked the day, including at the Tower of London. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on your digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's...
Sophia, thank you. Welcome to GB News Live. Shocking scenes at today's Cabinet meeting as a familiar face rejoined proceedings.
Shocked, I tell you. Shocked.
Did anyone faint?
I don't know, maybe it was on the cards for a while, who knows? David Cameron attended a Cabinet meeting, of course he did, after returning to frontline politics 7 years after he stood down as Prime Minister following that Brexit referendum. He attended the first meeting of Rishi Sunak's new Cabinet following his shock appointment as Foreign Secretary.
The Prime Minister is stressing the importance now of building a united team after his dramatic reshuffle yesterday. But to do that, he will have to fight off some MPs on the right of the party who are said to be furious over the sacking of Suella Braverman as Home Secretary.
Yes, he's been accused by a group of Tory MPs for abandoning voters who helped the Conservative Party win that 2019 election. So, joining us from Downing Street is GB News political editor Christopher Hope from Westminster. I believe he has some guests with him.
That's right, I'm here on the College Green by Parliament. There's a big concern, I think, amongst people, the way that Suella Braverman was treated, removed from office so abruptly and not really replaced by anyone from the right. There's a very interesting group of Tory MPs called the New Conservatives. It's chaired by 2 ambitious rising star Tory MPs, Miriam Cates MP and Danny Kruger. And they're with me now to express their concerns about the reshuffle. If I can bring them in now. Miriam, Danny, thank you for joining us on GB News. Miriam, to you first. Why are you concerned about this reshuffle?
Well, I think firstly we just want to say that all the people that have been promoted is absolutely within the Prime Minister's gift. We've got a lot of respect for them personally. We're sure they'll give everything they have to the job. But what we're more concerned about is the direction of travel that it signals for the party. And instead of leaning back towards that realignment of 2019 voters, the combination of small Z Conservatives, people from the north, people from the south, it feels like going back to kind of 2010 and an era of centrism, which isn't really what people are crying out for now in the country.
Is your problem, Danny Kruger, that the answer that David Cameron is the wrong question? In a sense, he brought in that he won the election 2010, forgive me, formed that coalition with Lib Dems, but then there weren't very Tory policies following from that.
So I have a great respect for David Cameron personally. I worked for him many years ago, and as Miriam says, I think he'll do a great job as Foreign Secretary. The concern that we have is about the policy direction, and something very important happened in 2016. There was a realignment in our politics, a reorientation of the governing interest of the country towards the people and towards their values and attitudes. And we have an obligation, I think, particularly those of us elected in 2019, which was the great statement of support for the realignment, for this new politics. I think we have an obligation to deliver for those people. And amazingly, what happened in 2019 is that we managed to demonstrate a real break with the past of our own party in government. And I don't want to criticise what went on before. There were some good things that David did in government, but really the country wanted change, and we offered that change in 2019, and I think we still have to deliver it, and I still think that's what the country are expecting from us.
Miriam Cates, how big is the anger about the removal of someone like Suella Braverman from one of the big offices in government?
I don't think it's really about anger. I mean, obviously there are mixed views about Suella in the party. I think it's more what she symbolises. She did speak her mind. She did very much tap into ordinary people's sentiment on being concerned about the levels of immigration. You know, the issue that we were talking about last weekend, whether or not these protests should be banned, the vast majority of our voters believe that they should be banned. So this is bigger than one person, but it's about saying, is there anybody in cabinet who is speaking for that agenda, who is pushing forward? You know, amongst our voters, immigration is still the number one issue. Are we going to see this cabinet move towards that issue? And we've got to say, back to 2019, we promised to reduce net migration. It's gone up. How is the party going to move back towards that manifesto commitment over the next year?
We're speaking on the eve, aren't we, of the Supreme Court ruling on that Rwanda plan. Next week, the net migration figures come back on Thursday, which could show an even bigger figure than last year. 600,000 people arrived here legally on your government's watch. Do you worry there's no one at the top of government now who reflects the right? Has the right, in terms of the Tory right, being expunged from the top of government? Danny Kruger.
Well, listen, it's not about personalities. As I say, we're very supportive of the government itself, of the PM, and he appoints his cabinet. But I think on a policy level, you're right, there is real concern. We are committed to reducing net migration. It went up from 200,000 to 600,000 last year. I hope it'll come down in the new figures because we will have seen less of the refugees from Hong Kong and Ukraine, but still it will be unacceptably high. I mean, David Cameron himself committed to reducing migration to the tens of thousands when he became Prime Minister. I still think that is the right objective for us, and we do need the government to be committed to this. There are a series of proposals that we made, our group, the New Conservatives, to reduce legal migration by raising the salary threshold for working visas, reducing the number of student visas and family reunification visas. So there are things we think the government could do, and we're committed to pushing for that.
There's one bigger idea than that, isn't there? In a statement out at this lunchtime obtained by GBNews, you talk about leaving the European Convention on Human Rights. Miriam Cates, how many of your colleagues believe that?
Well, I don't know numbers, but there's certainly a lot of feeling amongst the party that we must do what it takes in order to end the small boats crisis, to end illegal migration. Of course, the Rwanda plan is a big part of that. But I think as a group, and certainly on the right of the party, we feel that it's not just about leaving the ECHR. We need wholesale reform of our equalities and human rights laws in this country, because since 2010, since the Equality Act, we've seen all these kind of ideas that there is no democratic consensus for on sex and gender and race in our schools and our universities. And that's some of the things that people objected to when they voted in 2016 and 2017 and 2019. And unless we're really committed to reforming that Blairite system of laws, how are we going to push back against those kind of ideas that people are really concerned about?
Isn't it the case, though, Danny Kruger, that really they can ignore you now? How many members are there of the New Conservatives? We're told it's a few. Is it a few dozen? More than that? And can you be ignored by an increasingly centrist Tory government?
Well, I'm afraid we can be ignored, and we are being, and that's what we regret. But the party is a broad church, as the government has made clear. We'd like that to be more reflected in the appointments that the Prime Minister makes, but as we've said, that's up to him. What we want is the policies that reflect our manifesto commitment, and there are a very large number of people on our side in Parliament, on the backbenches of the Conservative Party, and frankly in government too, who share our concern. We're trying to speak in a way that's constructive. We really do not want to destabilise the leader. He's absolutely has every right to lead us into the election, and all this talk of splits and factions, it's totally unhelpful, obviously to the government, but also to our agenda. We're trying to push for what we think we were elected to do, and we think that's an appropriate thing for an MP. We're not trying to cause trouble for the government, but we do really think it's important that they honour the commitments that we all made as MPs, standing on that manifesto in 2019.
Miriam Cates, why are you raising money, and who are you going to give it to?
And so when it comes to an election and before an election, individual MPs and candidates have to fund their campaigns. So I'm sure all your viewers will have received lots of leaflets and letters and things like that through their door. MPs have to raise money in order to pay for those kind of things. And in some parts of the country, particularly, the Red Wall, there aren't necessarily many Conservative Party donors. So we want to make sure that MPs that stand for what we believe in, that are committed to that realignment, that kind of common sense agenda, have the funds they need in order to campaign. It's an ordinary way of campaigning. It's all, registered with the Electoral Commission, but we're very keen to raise funds for our MPs and our new Conservatives groups to make sure they've got the best chance possible of regaining their seat next time.
How much are you looking to raise, Danny Kruger, and will your policy platform conflict with the Tory party manifesto next election?
Well, we want to raise as much money as we can and also to mobilise volunteers and people to help us campaign in our seats. So anybody who wants to help us, get in touch. We're absolutely part of the Conservative family. This is not disloyal. And in terms of policy conflict, I mean, no, we're proposing new policy. Nothing is in conflict with where we are at the moment. We think we need to go further on a whole bunch of issues, on crime, on immigration, on tax, on skills. There's a whole bunch of stuff that would satisfy, we think, that promise that we made in 2019 to our voters, and we think that the manifesto process, which will be getting underway now for the next election, is an opportunity, and it's important that we contribute to that.
Why has this government lost touch with this mandate that you think you did get in 2019? Why has it gone wrong for you, Miriam Cates?
Well, I think the 2016 vote was about losing touch, and it was the kind of vote that was shared across Europe and in America in different elections around the time. And there was this sense that the elite, if you like, the political class, had lost touch with the roots of the people who voted for them. And in 2016 and since then, we've seen a real struggle for the establishment, essentially, to move into the place of the ordinary people rather than the other way around. And that's what's so concerning about the reshuffle yesterday. Again, all the people involved are brilliant people who are very committed, but do they reflect the views and values of ordinary people on tax, on immigration, on family, on kind of small c Conservative values? And that's what we are concerned about. We know from the polling there is still huge demand for those kind of policies and that kind of politics. The question is, are we ready to supply it?
Danny Kruger, is it depressing that none of you two or any of your colleagues are good enough to be Foreign Secretary? In fact, the PM had to go outside even the House of Lords to find an old mate to give one of the big jobs in government.
I don't really buy that analysis, actually, Chris. I think it's okay. I mean, heads of government around the world appoint to their cabinet from the range of candidates, as it were, and I actually think there is some value in having some expertise from outside Parliament. I mean, yes, I'm sure there are many of our colleagues who would have loved to be Foreign Secretary and who would have done a great job. But actually, I mean, I think David is perfectly qualified. I mean, I think there is a challenge around his record, what he stood for, particularly around China, and of course the European Union. I mean, he led the Remain campaign, and here he is now in charge of our relations with Europe. But as long as he follows the Prime Minister's lead, as long as he genuinely honours the mandate that we have as a government to govern in our interests, I'm not concerned about his appointment personally. I do think it sends a very confusing signal to our voters, and overall the shape of the government now is not where we think it should be.
Miriam Cates, is it time for Mr Sunak to face a vote of no confidence? Overnight we had Dame Andrea Jenkin, forgive me, also the wrong Andrea there, Dame Andrea Jenkin putting out a letter into Graham Brady, a vote of no confidence. Is it time for a vote of no confidence in your PM, your leader?
No, absolutely not. As I said, we fully support Rishi, we back his government, but we are concerned about the direction of travel, and we are using our voice as backbenchers, not just to put the interests of our party in first, because of course we believe that's important, but also the interests of the country as a whole.
Danny Kruger, have you put that in yet?
No, I haven't, and I won't, and I really echo that point. And I think it is really regrettable that everything is reduced to this question of personalities. And I regret that many of our colleagues attack us personally for putting forward what we think are legitimate Conservative views that are in fact in keeping with our manifesto commitment. So if only we could have this debate at the level it should be at, which is about policy and about the public interest, rather than about personalities and positions, then I think we could have a much more civil debate that would be in the interests of the country.
Is it the truth, though, finally, Miriam Cates, that your party's been in power off and on with other parties, but since 2010, it's kind of exhausted and a bit tired of being in power?
Well, I don't think it's exhausted. We've got lots of colleagues who have got plenty of fight left in them. But I do think it's time to be serious about the serious issues that face this country. And of course, the Prime Minister's got some great ideas. But we've seen on our streets, what have we seen in the last 5 weeks? Some serious divisions in our country that we can't ignore, that aren't going to go away, and that do pose a serious threat to our future if we don't talk about them and deal with them. And that's what the government should be doing.
Danny Kruger, last one to you. Marks out of 10 for the reshuffle.
Well, listen, in terms of policy direction, I'm concerned. I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. Some good people, some great people, but I'm afraid we're going back into the politics of decline. That is our concern. Where is the energy and the spirit of change that 2019 represented? And I worry that we're going in the wrong direction now, even though all the people involved are tremendous and we support them.
Well, Danny Kruger, Miriam Cates from the New Conservative Group, thank you for joining us today on GB News. And a reflection there, I think, of a lot of concerns I'm hearing privately from MPs about the reshuffle yesterday and about the PM's leadership. Some work to do, I think, for him. Back to you in the studio.
Thank you very much indeed, Christopher Hope, our political editor there in Westminster, talking to Miriam Cates and Danny Kruger. Very interesting. Two small C Conservative politicians, exasperated, I feel, with the direction of travel of the government. They were very polite. They gave very thoughtful answers. It seems they want change when it comes to immigration. They're concerned with divisions in society. They're not impressed, perhaps, by Rishi Sunak's direction of travel and letting go of some of those voters.
Politics of decline, Danny Kruger labelled it. They also think that this reshuffle means that the parties sacrificed all those seats that they won in the former Labour heartlands back in 2019. Well, in one of them, in Stoke-on-Trent, is our reporter Jack Carson. He's in the Red Wall seat of Stoke-on-Trent, as I just said. Jack, what have people there been saying to you?
Yeah, well, I think particularly what Danny Kruger was saying in an interview there about the politics of change and being promised change, that's certainly the promise that people here in the seats of Stoke-on-Trent North, where I am today, they don't feel like they have got that change. Of course, many of them here, this seat itself was Labour and has been Labour for decades. It, of course, then changed hands in 2019, that big Brexit election in 2019. Boris Johnson promising not only, of course, to get Brexit done, but lots of change, particularly around the issues on, of course, immigration and being able, of course, to take back control of lots of you know, our own policy. Those people feel let down by those promises. They don't feel like they've been fulfilled now with Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister, and so particularly here talking to people today around kind of the idea that David Cameron, of course, somebody that was running that Remain camp, of course, coming back when this area itself was such a heavy Brexit voting area, how that went down. They don't necessarily feel like having David Cameron, I think overall, as someone who, of course, has not been elected, has had to be made a peer in the House of Lords in order to become Foreign Secretary. They don't necessarily feel like that was the right decision. One voter said to me, how is it that out of all of the MPs that Rishi Sunak has got, not one of them could be basically picked and chosen to do the job. But of course, on whether Rishi Sunak can still win here, that's a big question for him, because of course, if this seat goes back to Labour, goes back to Keir Starmer, it might well show the trend that the country and the swing that the country will be taking in the next general election. But on, of course, whether Rishi Sunak can hold on to this seat, on whether that appointment of David Cameron to Foreign Secretary was the right one, here's a couple of people I spoke to a little bit earlier on.
Rishi Sunak, I don't think so. I don't know, maybe Labour.
It was a surprise, didn't expect it at all, but I'm confident he's very experienced and I think he'll do a good job. I think he will, yeah, I'm sure he will. Conservative, always have.
Yeah, and particularly when you see the reaction from the Labour Party, of course, to that reshuffle. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves saying people will be wondering how David Cameron coming back into government will help them pay for their weekly shop. That will certainly probably be reflected and probably cut through here in Stoke-on-Trent North. The area I'm in today, Burslem, is one of the poorest areas of Stoke-on-Trent, and so particularly they'll be feeling how these big decisions are really going to impact them, how Rishi Sunak is going to change things for the better for them, because it's all going to be about trust coming up to that next election. Of course, we've got a big week for Rishi Sunak, of course, on the decision on that Rwanda plan, of course, the inflation figures as well. People here will be measuring how much money they've got in their pockets compared to when, of course, they decided to lend their vote to the Conservative Party in 2019. They'll be looking at their pockets and all kinds of other issues, like mass migration as well, like being able to stop the boats, as to whether they give Rishi Sunak their vote again and the Conservatives their vote again, or whether they switch back to Labour like they have been here for decades.
Thank you very much indeed, Jack Carson there in Stoke-on-Trent. Are Miriam Cates and Danny Kruger right that Rishi Sunak has abandoned those 2019 voters? those voters, like in places like Stoke-on-Trent. It's looking likely. Let us know at home what you think, what you make of the reshuffle, what you make of the direction of travel. Do you agree with what some of Danny Kruger and Miriam Cates had to say there with Chris Hope?
Yeah, we've only got a year to find out if they feel abandoned, but we'll be discussing it a lot more here on GB News. Stay with us, because still to come, we'll be talking about the XL bully dog, because applications have opened today for owners to register them ahead of the ban on February the 1st. But it sounds like a little bit of a complicated process. We'll be talking to people about that straight after this. Stay with us.
Hello, very good day to you. It's Alex Burkill here again with your latest GB News weather forecast. The unsettled picture continues through the next few days. There will be heavy rain at times and some strong blustery winds. At the moment, there are a few occluded fronts across the UK, and these bring the focus for the showery rain that we're going to see as we go through the rest of the day and overnight. A cloudy picture across many northern areas, particularly across Scotland, with some heavy outbreaks of rain at times, perhaps some winteriness over the higher ground too. Some clear skies across the far north of Scotland could allow for a touch of frost here. Elsewhere further south, also some clear skies. Temperatures not dropping a huge amount, and a few showers to watch out for as well. As we go into Wednesday, a cloudy, wet story across many northern areas. Still some heavier outbreaks of rain possible here. Drier and brighter towards the south, just 1 or 2 showers to watch out for across parts of Wales and southwest England. Also some decent sunshine across the far north of Scotland too. Temperatures for many likely to be down a degree or so compared to today. We're looking at highs of around 12, possibly 13 Celsius in the south and southwest. As we go into Thursday, and we are going to see a swathe of wet and windy weather pushing its way up from the southwest. We could see gales, perhaps even a bit stronger than that, around coastal parts, and some significant rainfall too. More unsettled weather to come as we head towards the weekend, with some heavy rain likely then, but we are also going to see temperatures rising as well. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6 is Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political budgets.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Welcome back. It was one of the UK's shocking child murders, something that you probably remember very well. A 2-year-old toddler, Jamie Bulger, snatched from a shopping centre in Merseyside and brutally murdered by 2 10-year-old boys. One of the killers has a parole hearing which started today, but the mother of little James Bulger is urging the board not to release him. Let's bring in our reporter Ray Addison, who can explain it all.
Thanks, Emily and Pip. Well, it was February the 12th of 1993 when 2-year-old James Bulger was snatched during a shopping trip to the Strand shopping centre in Bootle in Merseyside. Now, just 2 days later, his body was found by children on railway tracks just 2 miles away. He'd been tortured and killed. Now, John Venables was 10 years old when he and Robert Thompson murdered James, and after 8 years in jail, they were both freed on licence and they were granted lifelong immunity, rather anonymity, I should say. But in 2017, John Venables was jailed again after child abuse images were found on his computer. Now, not only could Venables be released, but James's parents have been barred from attending the parole hearing. Instead, Ralph and Denise have issued impact statements begging the parole board to keep their son's killer behind bars, and of course terrified that Venables will reoffend. Now, in her plea to the parole board, James's mother, Denise, says, "Look into my eyes and see what I've had to deal with for 30 years, 3 decades of hell. Make the right decision for everyone and keep my son's killer behind bars." Now, of course, during the parole board hearing, the panel will look for any evidence that they can find of behavioural change in Venables. They'll question key witnesses like psychologists, his probation officers, and if he's willing to give evidence to that hearing, John Venables himself. If they decide that Venables poses what they call a manageable risk to the public, then he could be released before Christmas. Now, of course, this comes as the Victims and Prisoners Bill is actually going through Parliament. Now, that's promising tougher measures aimed at strengthening the parole system and actually making public protection, the government says, the top priority in deciding which prisoners are actually safe for release. It will also give ministers greater oversight and the power to overturn release decisions for the most serious offenders.
Thank you very much indeed, Ray Addison. There. I mean, it's horrific what has happened. What's interesting with this parole hearing is that the parents of James Bulger will not be allowed to attend. It seems in the court of public opinion, which of course does not matter in this instance, a lot of people saying he should not even be up for this hearing, should not be up, should not be considered even.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we will, of course, bring you up to date on what happens on GB News. That decision not expected, though, for around 2 weeks after this private hearing today and tomorrow.
Still to come, including claims from Israel's security forces that it has uncovered a Hamas bunker under a Gaza hospital where hostages could have been held. We'll get an update. First, your news headline with Sophia.
It's 2:32. I'm Sophia Wansler in the GB newsroom. The public believes sacking Suella Braverman was the right move, but are less sure about bringing David Cameron back into government. A poll from Ipsos found 70% of people think Rishi Sunak made the right call in removing his Home Secretary. That's 60% of those voters are Conservative in 2019, but only around a third of voters said Lord Cameron's appointment as Foreign Secretary was the right decision. Lord Cameron admits such a return is not usual, but says he wants to support Mr Sunak through a difficult job at a hard time. Palestinians trapped inside Gaza's biggest hospital are digging a mass grave to bury hundreds of patients who have died since the conflict began. The hospital, besieged by Israeli forces, is no longer functioning, with insufficient electricity, water and other basics. Israel has accused Hamas of having a command and control centre under the hospital, which the terror group denies. Foreign Office Minister Andrew Mitchell says the UK is considering using air and maritime options to get more aid into Gaza. A 62-gun salute is fired at the Tower of London to mark King Charles's 75th birthday. Charles is launching the Food Coronation Project with the Queen, which aims to bridge the gap between food waste and food need. The King's birthday plans will also see him hosting a reception for NHS nurses and midwives at Buckingham Palace. Ceremonial gun salutes have marked the day, including at the Tower of London. And you can get more on all those stories by visiting our website at gbnews.com.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only three people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate. Both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Live. Just a little bit of news on Israel and Gaza, which we are about to talk about. Foreign Office Minister Andrew Mitchell is travelling to Egypt tonight. That has come after calls a little earlier from MPs to ensure that that crucially needed humanitarian aid reaches people in Gaza. And there's also been a report from the Times of Israel today that has stated Israeli troops have captured the headquarters of Gaza's military police.
Yes, from the pictures here, we can see them holding up an Israeli flag in the same way they were pictured inside Gaza's Parliament building yesterday. Hundreds of patients still remain trapped inside Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City. That's as fighting continues between Israeli troops and Hamas.
Israeli troops say they've uncovered a hospital basement with evidence that children were held hostage there by Hamas. They found, they say, baby bottles, nappies and chairs with ropes.
And aid agencies have warned that critically ill patients and babies are at risk of death due to the lack of fuel, supplies and essentials such as food and water.
Well, joining us now is the Israeli government spokesman, Avi Hyman. Thank you for talking to us this afternoon, Avi. Those pictures we saw just now of the Gaza military police station captured, the Parliament building yesterday, it sounds like, as far as you're concerned, you are making good progress.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we are ploughing ahead with our mission. Our mission, as stated from the beginning, is to destroy Hamas, to destroy their military operation, to destroy their governance. So never again can those savages cross through our borders, going house to house, slaughtering our people, killing children in front of their parents, parents in front of their children, opening fire on babies' cold, beheading babies. We're going to make sure that never again will we see an attack the likes of which we have not seen since the Holocaust.
Avi, Benjamin Netanyahu, your Prime Minister, said on Sunday, I believe it was, suggested that there could be a deal to release hostages, a deal with Hamas itself, but for many reasons, of course, he didn't go into too much detail about that. Can you tell us whether there's been any progress in terms of releasing those hostages, finding them first and then getting them to safety?
Well, as my Prime Minister said, we do have intelligence, but we won't be broadcasting it to Hamas. Our first and foremost wish is to see those 239 hostages at home with their families. It's unacceptable. You know, they took men, women, and the elderly, Holocaust survivors, a 9-month-old baby who is now turned 10 months in captivity. This is an abhorrent enemy that came and killed our babies and is now hiding behind their own.
You mentioned babies there, Avi. Would you say every baby is precious?
As a father, it pains me to see what is happening on the ground. It pains me that a terrorist organization has set up their command and control center underneath a hospital. You know, our troops just put out footage, some of which I just saw actually on your broadcast, of the Rantisi Children's Hospital, where we found underground tunnels where they were stockpiling ammunition and weapons and suicide bomb belts. And also what was even more alarming, which was a room which seemed to have been made, they'd haphazard put in a toilet there and a shower. And they also had clear evidence, which we're obviously continuing to investigate, but it seemed to be clear evidence of a place where they were holding not only, adult civilians, but also children, also infants. We found an open packet of nappies. We found multiple babies' bottles. And one of the babies' bottles was just sitting on top of a unit there with the words World Health Organization. So yeah, we're dealing with a brutal enemy that commits a double war crime of attacking civilians from deep within civilians. As one of the Hamas leaders said in recent days, as far as they're concerned, Hamas is safe deep underneath the ground in their underground tunnels, while the people of Gaza above ground, well, that's the problem of the UN and Israel to deal with. And that's why Israel a month ago said...
Avi, sorry to jump in. We are running out of time, and we were talking about babies. I also want to ask you about the babies in Al-Shifa Hospital that do appear to be trapped. How are you going to get them out? We're just looking at an image now. I know there's incubators that are going from Israel to Gaza, but the problem seems to be powering those incubators, not actually a lack of incubators.
So unfortunately, this is a Hamas-made crisis that we're doing our very best to deal with. We've offered fuel, hundreds of litres of fuel for those incubators. Like you said, we've offered incubators. We've offered to evacuate the hospital, to bring ambulances if need be, to get those people to safety, just like we, just a month ago said that we want to evacuate, that people should evacuate to the south, to those safer zones, through the safe corridors, and 1 million Gazans have listened to us to get out of the line of fire. Hamas wants you to see these pictures. Hamas wants to put their babies on the front line because they think that is a way to ensure that there's enough international pressure on us to surrender, to ceasefire. But we won't do that because we need to provide security to our citizens. We need to ensure that never again can these beasts come through our borders and behead our babies.
Avi, do you have a mechanism, though, as to how to move the babies? Because it sounds like they don't have long. Is there a plan set out to get them out of that hospital, which is fast turning into a morgue, we understand?
Yeah, the sites are awful, and that's exactly what Hamas wants you to see. So when we provided the fuel, Hamas stopped the hospital from taking it. When we said we would evacuate the babies yesterday, they stopped us from doing it. Hamas is ensuring that those pictures continue, and unfortunately, the death of any civilians in Gaza is on Hamas's hands. They hide behind their people and attack our people, committing a double war crime.
Israeli government spokesman Avi Hyman. We'll have to leave it there, but really appreciate you talking to us and giving us an update this afternoon here on GB News. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Avi. Now, applications are open for XL bully dog owners, if you're one, to apply for an exemption before the breed is made illegal. All dogs that are not exempted will be euthanised after it becomes illegal to own one from the 1st of February. Owners will be able to choose to have their dogs euthanised and apply for compensation.
Well, joining us to discuss this is editor of Dogs Today magazine, Beverly Cuddy, and Sophie Coulthard with her dog Billy, who is believed to be an American XL bully type. Sophie, if I can just start with you, maybe we can see Billy while we're chatting. How simple or not are you finding this process?
The hardest thing is the government definition of the XL bully. I mean, I'm in a position where Billy doesn't quite meet the height criteria, but he obviously meets a lot of the other characteristics that are being described in the guidelines. But it's caused so much confusion for people who are saying, you know, I don't know whether to exempt my dog and take the conditions that come with that, or take the risk and walk my dog every day, not knowing if that dog will be seized.
Do you understand why some members of the public may have little sympathy with some XL bully dog owners when it comes to what the government is trying to implement here? It sounds like, yes, there are terms and conditions. Owners are going to have to go through some hoops, and sadly, some dogs may be euthanised. But we must remember why we are here, and that's because XL bully dogs have, unfortunately, carried out half of the fatal dog attacks in the UK, and that's since the pandemic.
I will question those statistics because we don't have full proof of all the breeds that are responsible for these attacks. I think it's fair to say that any dog that's a larger bull breed that's been involved in any attacks has been described as an XL bully, which is why the government have had such a difficult task trying to define this type. And I think you could say, what is the difference between a dog that is 1 inch shorter or 1 inch taller than another? That means that dog is dangerous. So I think we really do need to move away from labelling a dog based purely on its measurement as to whether that dog is dangerous or not. And let's face it, the American bully comes in different sizes as well. So are we saying that the XL bully is a danger and the pocket bully is not a danger? They're the same breed.
If we can just bring in Beverly Cuddy from Dogs Today. Beverly, what does this mean for the fate of dogs that are currently in dogs' homes? Are they going to be put down, put to sleep? I mean, dogs' homes are going to be filling up, aren't they? What will happen to them?
Well, sadly, even before this started, we were on 130% occupancy in rescue. So that's... obviously, there's no room for any more dogs. But any dogs that are left unhomed by the end of, I think it's New Year's Eve, are either trapped there which is obviously something that rescues don't really want to do, because if you can imagine, this is not a proper life for a dog being kept locked up for a whole... a lot of these dogs will be very young. If they're not found a home before New Year's Eve, they have to be put to sleep. And as we've seen, this definition is so vague that any smooth-haired crossbreed, bigger than a whippet, could be, well, this could be the biggest cull the country's ever seen of dogs, probably since the war.
Surely there needs to be some guidelines, though. Would you agree with that? And responsible owners, they've been given the opportunity to come forward, apply for an exemption, register their dog. They have to keep a lead on in public, muzzle the dog in public, microchip neutered. If you're a responsible owner who cares about your dog, surely you'll go through those stages in order to keep it. What's the problem?
I think if you know definitively you have a Bully XL, then you have to accept that the law is changing. If there is a legal appeal going in to totally question whether or not this is actually correct, that we can do this. But if it goes ahead, then living your life with an exempted dog is not easy. If you're in rented accommodation, you may find that you are evicted. If you have a criminal record, you may find that the courts will deem you not a fit person to own a dog. If you've got children and you end up going to court, they may rule that this isn't a suitable home for that dog. It is not quite as simple as just putting a muzzle on and taking your dog to walk. Immediately, your pet health insurance is voided. So if you've got a dog that's maybe on long-term medication, just because of the way the dog looks, not how it behaves, you are very, very majorly disadvantaged. And we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dogs here, not just Bully XLs. This is anybody with a dog that fits this very broad standard at the moment.
Sorry to interrupt. Do you think anyone... Sorry to interrupt. Do you think anyone in this country should be allowed to own any dog as they like without any regulation at all from the government? Because that's a point of view. Do you share that view?
I think everybody would welcome some proper legislation that does take everything much more seriously, the ownership of dogs, the breeding of dogs. It's been a free-for-all for so long, and we've been nagging government to bring in proper measures to make responsible ownership much more easy to achieve. There is no regulation of dog trainers, no regulation. The way breeders are regulated is very vague, and the use of the microchip, was put into law so long ago, but so often these details are not even recorded as to who bred each dog. And that it should be a case that if you breed badly, if your dogs end up causing a problem and hurting people, there there should be a consequence to that.
Yeah,
At the
Sophie,
moment,
sorry, Beverly, we're fast running out of time, and I just want to very briefly bring Sophie and Billy back in. We've just been watching training videos there with Billy, and he looks beautifully behaved. He looks beautiful, but there are a lot of irresponsible dog owners, aren't there, Sophie? Are there going to be, in your eyes, a lot of people who will actually dodge this ban because it's unenforceable?
I mean, that's it, isn't it? People that are going to avoid the law in general will probably not exempt their dogs. So I think we're looking at a situation where responsible owners like myself will comply because we're scared that our family pet, who we love, is going to be taken from us. But if the government actually looked at real legislation, such as licensing, educating dog owners, then we could have a much better solution for the future of the UK instead of this knee-jerk reaction, which is just going to impact the quality of life for thousands of dogs. You know, everybody gets a dog so that they can take their dog on walks and enjoy their time in the outdoors, hopefully play with their dog, do training. And a lot of this, you know, we've heard some of the bigger consequences, like we've heard regarding things like losing health insurance. But even just those small things, being able to take my dog to the park and play with him with a toy and do some training are things that we're going to lose here. And the government could instantly change this by looking at licensing instead of a ban.
Sophie Coulthard, Beverly, Cuddy and Billy, thank you all so much for discussing this. It's very difficult,
I might be on my
isn't
own
it?
on that one. I just
think they
can't
have a
muster
point.
up the sympathy for the owners, to be honest, because you hear from owners who thought their XL bully was beautiful and lovely, and then one day it switches and you can't necessarily control it, even if you're the most responsible owner in the world.
But then there's people that say it is bad owners, it's not bad dogs. But we've got to move on because we've got to talk about King Charles celebrating his 75th birthday today. Let's talk to our royal correspondent, Cameron Walker, who is in Oxfordshire. Cameron, he's been very busy.
Pip, he certainly has, and it's business as usual for the King. He was treated to a rendition of Happy Birthday by the crowd who are gathered outside this warehouse, which is distributing food to 120 community organisations across Oxfordshire, Berkshire and Wiltshire. But this is a nationwide new scheme that the King has launched today, the Coronation Food Project, hoping to bridge the gap between food waste and the food need across the UK, because it's estimated 14 million people across the country are at risk of being food insecure. Now, I spoke earlier to Dame Martina Milburn, the co-chair of the Coronation Food Project, and she was talking about how King Charles is passionate about helping with the cost of living.
And for a long time, he's been very worried about the cost of living crisis on families in particular. And he's also always been passionate about trying to reduce surplus waste and things like that. So he simply wondered if there was a way of putting the two things together.
Well, later, King Charles will be at Buckingham Palace hosting a reception with nurses and midwives celebrating 75th anniversary of the NHS. He's then going to be, as we understand it, attending a private party with friends and family at Clarence House. But Prince Harry will not be there, although the BBC is reporting that he is expected to ring his father from across the Atlantic.
Thank you, Cameron, our royal correspondent, Cameron Walker, there on King Charles's 75th birthday. That's it from us today.
Happy birthday, Majesty. Martin Daubney's up next. Bye-bye.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Good afternoon, it's 3 p.m. Welcome to the show. GB News with me, Martin Dordney. Loads in the next hour, including Rishi on the ropes, Jacob Rees-Mogg, Andrea Jenkins, Lord Frost, Kruger. They're all queuing up to put the boot into Rishi. The question is, will this sink Sunak? Will the right take him down? After that, David Cameron, the new Foreign Secretary. Well, he was meant to be a safe pair of hands, but there seems to be loads of skeletons in his closet on Brexit, on China, on lobbying, on austerity. Will the boy actually be a liability for the Conservatives? Next up, happy birthday, King Charles. 103 gun salute, cake galore, and a phone call across the Atlantic from Prince Harry. Well, you can't have it all. But happy birthday to you, the King. And finally, Rwanda or bust. Tomorrow morning at 9:30, the Supreme Court ruling is due. If the Tories can't manage this, it must be the end of them. Will this sink the Conservatives? They promised to stop the boats. Can they do it? Tomorrow is absolutely key to the future of the party. All that coming up in this next hour. So yeah, as ever, please get in touch. gbviews@gbnews.com. Loads to think about there. A lot of you have been saying all day you think Suella was right. Jacob Rees-Mogg agrees. Basically, is it over for Rishi? Let us know on that. And this Supreme Court ruling tomorrow on Rwanda. If the Tories don't manage that, if the blob, if the lawyers, if the lefties actually are in control, what does that mean for the future of our country? All that coming up right after your news headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Good afternoon, it's 1 minute past 3. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. The public believe sacking Suella Braverman was the right move, but are unsure about bringing David Cameron back into government. Ipsos found 70% of the public think Rishi Sunak made the right call in removing his Home Secretary. That's including 60% of those that voted Conservative in 2019. But only around a third of voters said Lord Cameron's appointment as Foreign Secretary was the right decision. He's admitted his return is unusual, but said he wants to continue supporting the Prime Minister during a difficult time. Rishi Sunak has pledged to change the country for the better.
I know that this strong and united team is going to deliver that change for everybody. We've got an important week coming up. On Wednesday, we'll have inflation numbers. We'll also have the Supreme Court ruling on our Rwanda plan. And next Wednesday, the Chancellor will be delivering an important autumn statement. And across all of that, I'm confident that we can demonstrate to the country that we're making progress on the priorities that I set out at the beginning of the year. And looking around this table, I know that we have an energetic and enthusiastic team that is going to deliver for the country. So let's get to work.
Our political editor, Chris Hope, spoke to Conservative MPs Miriam Cates and Danny Kruger about their concerns over the party's direction.
Firstly, we just want to say that all the people that have been promoted is absolutely within the Prime Minister's gift. We've got a lot of respect for them personally. We're sure they'll give everything they have to the job. But what we're more concerned about is the direction of travel that it signals for the party. And instead of leaning back towards that realignment of 2019 voters, the combination of small C Conservatives, people from the north, people from the south, it feels like going back to kind of 2010 and an era of centrism, which isn't really what people are crying out for now in the country.
Palestinians trapped inside Gaza's biggest hospital are digging a mass grave to bury hundreds of patients who have died since the conflict began. The hospital, besieged by Israeli forces, is no longer functioning with insufficient electricity, water and other basics. Israel has accused Hamas of having a command and control centre under the hospital, which the terror group denies. Foreign Office Minister Andrew Mitchell says the UK is considering using air and maritime options to get more aid into Gaza.
Hospitals, Mr. Speaker, should be places of safety, able to treat patients with compassion. It is distressing to see them unable to do so. Every civilian death is heartbreaking. It is impossible to comprehend the pain and loss that innocent Palestinians are enduring. We are focused on getting life-saving aid to those in need in Gaza.
Two further complainants have come forward to the BBC since it launched a review into the behaviour of Russell Brand. The BBC says the nature of the allegations are not specified. The investigation now indicates a total of 5 complaints directly to the corporation. It added that there were no disciplinary actions taken against the comedian during his time with the company. Exam results could be disrupted next year after Scottish Qualifications Authority staff voted to strike over a dispute over pay. Unite Union said its members have backed strike action for the second year running after being offered what they called an entirely unacceptable 2-year pay offer for 2023 and 2024. Hundreds of Unite members backed strike action by 72% on an 80% turnout. A 62-gun salute was fired at the Tower of London to mark King Charles's 75th birthday. Charles is launching the Coronation Food Project with the Queen, which aims to bridge the gap between food waste and food need. The King's birthday plans will also see him hosting a reception for NHS nurses and midwives at Buckingham Palace. Ceremonial gun salutes have marked the day, including at the Tower of London. Co-chair of the Coronation Food Project, Dame Martina Milburn, says King Charles is passionate about the cost of living.
And for a long time, he's been very worried about the cost of living crisis on families in particular. And he's also always been passionate about trying to reduce surplus waste and things like that. So he simply wondered if there was a way of putting the two things together.
This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on your digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Martin.
Now, thank you, Sophia. Now, we start with the fallout from yesterday's dramatic cabinet reshuffle. David Cameron, of course, was at his morning's cabinet meeting after he started his new role as Foreign Secretary. More on him in a moment. But the Prime Minister is facing a backlash from MPs on the right of the party after he sacked Suella Braverman. Well, our political editor, Christopher Hope, is in Downing Street. Chris, they've been queuing up to put the boot in today. Miriam Cates just said Rishi is abandoning 29 voters. Danny Kruger talks about the politics of decline. Andrea Jenkins, a no-confidence letter. Enough is enough. Jacob Rees-Mogg, Lord Frost, they're queuing up to put the boot in. The big question now is, Chris, where will this go? Could this turn into a full-blown revolt or even submitting letters to the 1922 committee? What do you think?
It's a bit of a death spiral, isn't it? The government feels to me a bit tired, out of ideas. The fact that they couldn't find a single MP to be Foreign Secretary, they had to go outside even the group of peers in Parliament, the Palace of Westminster, and find David Cameron from the past and give him the job. It does smack a bit of Lord Mandelson, Peter Mandelson, coming back into the Brown government in 2008-9, I think it was, just before that defeat at the 2010 general election. There is some concern, no question, amongst backbench Tory MPs. Dame Andrea Jenkins put in a letter last night of no confidence to Graham Brady. I think that was an outlier. I don't think he should be followed by many people, not least because there's no obvious candidate to replace Mr Sunak, with Boris Johnson having quit Parliament in the summer. There's a group called the New Conservatives, around 30 or so, who are trying to get the party back to where they think it was in 2019 with that big landslide. The two main co-chairs of that are Danny Kruger and Miriam Cates. And earlier, I caught up with them on College Green. Here's what they had to say.
Well, I think firstly we just want to say that all the people that have been promoted is absolutely within the Prime Minister's gift. We've got a lot of respect for them personally. We're sure they'll give everything they have to the job. But what we're more concerned about is the direction of travel that it signals for the party. And instead of leaning back towards that realignment of 2019 voters, the combination of small Z Conservatives, people from the north, people from the south, it feels like going back to kind of 2010 and an era of centrism, which isn't really what people are crying out for now in the country.
So I have a great respect for David Cameron personally. I worked for him many years ago, and as Miriam says, I think he'll do a great job as Foreign Secretary. The concern that we have is about the policy direction, and something very important happened in 2016. There was a realignment in our politics, a reorientation of the governing interest of the country towards the people.
And then we heard there, didn't we, from Danny Kruger and Miriam Cates, well, their concerns about the reshuffle. Now, those two don't think, I think, there'll be a change in leadership in the top of the Tory party. They merely want to bring the party back to where they were in 2019. Early today, around 9:30, of course, this new team met around Rishi Sunak. That we heard from him earlier, the PM, saying there that let's get back to work. Opposite him, of course, was David Cameron, the former Prime Minister, who resigned on the step behind me at Downing Street in 2016 in his first formal role back in 10 Downing Street. He's walked through the barriers here. He went off for lunch at the Carlson Club. They all cheered him in. There's been quite a big moment, I think, for Cameron. He knows he's back. Lots of MPs are delighted he's back. He's a grown-up on the world stage with big issues to deal with in Ukraine and the Middle East. But there is a problem here, I think, for the Tory party, how they're going to energise the base, how they're going to reverse those defeats that happened in the by-elections early this year. If David Cameron is the answer, Martin, what is the question?
Yeah, and it's fair to say, Chris, that if you take the temperature of Conservative voters across the Telegraph, across GB News, across the Daily Mail, across Daily Express, they are absolutely furious with this reshuffle and what's been going on. They feel that Rishi has sacked off Suella against the will of the voters, and that poll we saw 75% of Conservatives backed Suella's position. Talks there of abandoning 2019 voters and going back to the future, the bad old days of centrism. Chris, you speak to a lot of voters too. This doesn't feel like what the voters, what the electorate, and they're the most important people, it doesn't feel like what they want.
I've been struck, as you may have been, Martin, by the polling on David Cameron. Not all the world appears delighted that he's back. I think in the Westminster bubble that I have to live in as my job as GB News' political editor, there's a relief that the familiar faces are back, that the big figures are back, and David Cameron is a big beast, no question. But I just wonder if that's cutting through outside of the bubble that I'm in. I think it isn't, looking at the numbers. Looking at the GB News emails, I was lucky enough to host Nigel Farage's show last night, and there was lots of frustration from people about why is Cameron back? He lost, he's a Remainer, he's out of touch, he's been trying to lobby the government, and that didn't go very well for him, did it? Why is he back? It looks like they're finding a new idea that they can't quite grasp what it is yet, and that's the concern. I think what the MPs here want to hear is more from the PM and more from David Cameron about how they can help turn this around. There's a little over a year left to the election, and they are miles behind in the polls.
And Chris, very quickly, tomorrow's Supreme Court ruling on Rwanda now absolutely massive, to the point of being pivotal for the entire party's future.
Well, that's pretty big, Martin. I mean, it's definitely one of the 5 targets which Rishi Sunak set himself at the start of the year to stop the boats. And this decision at 10 a.m. tomorrow morning by the Supreme Court on whether to rule that it's legal to process illegal arrivals here in Rwanda is made then. Now, in the cabinet behind me, I do know that the Home Secretary, new Home Secretary James Cleverly, went through the options of what the Supreme Court might rule. It might say it's out of order altogether. It might say if you tweak the laws in this country, that'll make it work. So there are options they've looked at. What they haven't told us is how they'll respond to what the court says. Will they go ahead with threatening to pull out of the European Convention of Human Rights? That's the nuclear option, which Suella Braverman was in favour. We don't think James Cleverly is in favour. So it will set a lot of hairs running at 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. Watch it live on GB News. PMQs shortly after that. Next week, autumn statement, and then net migration figures, which should show a massive increase in number of illegal arrivals here on the government's watch. So a very, very big 8 days coming up for GB News and politics.
Yeah, nice quiet inbox for Rishi and his new cabinet. Thank you, Christopher Hope, live from Downing Street. Now, as promised, let's get some more on David Cameron. It's fair to say his return to government yesterday was the biggest shock, but it's proving to be a controversial decision by Rishi Sunak. Let's speak to our political correspondent, Olivia Utley. But before we get to the reaction to his appointment, David Cameron has already made his first big decision. Olivia, can you tell us more about that?
Well, he has indeed, Martin. It's just been announced that the UK, along with the US, will be putting sanctions in place on some of Hamas's leaders, 2 named leaders. These 2 leaders will be subject to travel bans and they will not be able to purchase weapons made in the UK or in the US. They'll also have their assets frozen. Any assets in the UK and in the US will be frozen. Now, this is a bold decision. It has been a long time coming. The US has apparently been talking about this for a while now. And on his very first full day in office, David Cameron has signed off this decision. He has also, in the same announcement, called again, talked about the plight of ordinary Gazans and called for a humanitarian pause in order to get supplies to Gazans and to allow people in Gaza to get out before any more shelling occurs. So his stance is what we would expect. It's in line with what the Prime Minister has been saying, humanitarian pause, but ultimately come down hard on Hamas and supporting Israel to do everything in its power to defend itself.
Now, Olivia, sounds like tough talking on your first day in the job. Very welcome rhetoric, but a lot of these guys are living in Qatar. They are living the life of international playboys. They have huge assets. How likely is it that the UK government will be effective at being able to reach into foreign countries where we have no jurisdiction, we have no agreement with? I mean, this sounds great, but will it have any teeth?
Well, absolutely. It's more a sign of intent than actually going to have a huge impact on these 2 Hamas leaders. It's to show the world stage, really, that the US and the UK mean business and that they are very serious about doing what they can to stamp down on Hamas. And I think that's the sort of message we'll be expecting to see a lot more of in the coming weeks and months. David Cameron is there in part because Rishi Sunak, as we've heard, seems to be kind of realigning towards the centre. He's got rid of Suella Braverman and he's gone back to the man who led the coalition government with the Lib Dems, thought of generally as quite a moderate Tory, though of course on economic issues he was probably further to the right than any Conservative Prime Minister we've seen since. But the other reason why David Cameron is there in that job is because Rishi Sunak is very keen to fully delegate matters of foreign affairs to his Foreign Secretary. Sometimes it's the case that you have a Foreign Secretary who essentially has the job in name only. As soon as a big international story breaks and there is serious diplomacy to be done, it ends up being the Prime Minister who has to drop everything and travel to whichever country is affected and conduct international relations there. In this case, Rishi Sunak is very much hoping that David Cameron will be able to sort of own the brief, as it were. He has a lot of contacts internationally, he has a reputation, he has sort of heft and gravitas on the world stage because of his 6 years as Prime Minister, which he mentioned in his first interview yesterday, and his 11 years as Conservative leader. Rishi Sunak's hope is that he will be able to delegate those issues to David Cameron, leaving him free to concentrate on issues back home. So the fact that David Cameron is the one making this statement, making this announcement in his very first day in office, and it's not Rishi Sunak doing it, does suggest that this is the way that the government is moving. I mean, that's all very well, but Rishi Sunak obviously has to consider too that delegating these responsibilities to his Foreign Secretary won't work too well if his Foreign Secretary remains the news story for much longer. At the moment, people are more interested in the fact that David Cameron is the Foreign Secretary than in anything that he has to say. And of course, there are big questions, not only about David Cameron's politics and the direction that Rishi Sunak is taking the Conservative government in before the election, but also about the fact that he is not an MP. It isn't unprecedented to have a great office of state held by a peer, but it is very unusual, particularly in the modern age. And already I've been hearing questions, well, I was in Parliament today listening to questions about how on earth the Commons will be able to scrutinise what the Foreign Secretary says when he is not allowed to appear in the House of Commons. He has a team of deputies. He will be there answering questions to the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, but it is all a little bit of a fudge.
Olivia Utley's superb as ever, and he makes you wonder, they're calling him a big beast, but it's fair to say he's getting monstered on China, on Brexit, on austerity and on lobbying. Let's move on now, because Labour have greeted David Cameron's return by accusing Rishi Sunak of being out of ideas.
My observation would be that having David Cameron as Foreign Secretary doesn't solve Rishi Sunak's problems. In fact, it's quite odd to me that Rishi Sunak has had to look to the past to try to bring back a quote-unquote grown-up to help get a control of the Conservative Party. If Rishi Sunak was a good enough Prime Minister, he would be able to get a grip of this, and he's failed to do so.
Well, one man who has a unique insight into the inner workings of government is Jonathan Haslam, who's also the former Director of Communications of 10 Downing Street. I'm delighted to say he joins me now. Thank you so much for joining us, Jonathan. They're calling him a big beast, but he's being monstered from his own party. And we've heard today from Miriam Cates, Danny Kruger, we're abandoning the 29 voters. We're going back to 2010. We're going back to the bad old days. And he's being criticised on his position on Brexit because, of course, the first thing he did when he lost the referendum was resign and clear off. And then the opposition are putting the boot in on things like austerity, China and lobbying. Do you think, with all that in mind, the skeletons he has in his closet, this was a wise appointment after all?
Good afternoon, Martin. It's an interesting appointment, and one of the things it's achieved, of course, is the fact that we're not talking about Suella Braverman at the moment. We might do tomorrow, but in the immediate aftermath of a reshuffle, he's put in James Cleverly into the Home Office, and that's a good solid move. And I think when you're looking at David Cameron, yes, he brings a lot of baggage with him, but actually, the electorate has a relatively small, short memory for some of the issues, which are, to an extent, they're important, but they are Westminster bubble stories. And if we look at what Mr. Cleverly has been doing as Foreign Secretary, well, he's been out of the country doing what Foreign Secretaries do. And therefore, David Cameron won't be the story for very much longer. And I think the other thing that's interesting, and picking up the vibes and everything that Olivia was talking about and Chris Hope a minute ago, it is an indication that Rishi Sunak gets one central point. Elections are won in the centre ground of the British public politic. And that's where they are. And he must have been concerned that there is far too much bordering on extreme right-wingism coming from the Conservative Party, and that's alienating a lot of people. We can talk about red wall seats and what they mean to people, but we should not ignore the shires, the areas where the Liberal Democrats have made inroads, and that is equally a danger. So Rishi Sunak is looking at things and saying, the polls are bad, but we're going to avoid a cataclysm, and this is part of a move to do it.
But, Jonathan, it wasn't the Liberal Democrat voters or Surrey or the Shires that handed Boris Johnson an 80-seat majority. It was the Red Wall. It was the Brexiteers. It was the working classes. It was the sort of people, actually, who are entirely behind Suella Braverman and feeling despondent of this return to 2010, this return to the bad old days of supporting Remain. Those people are the people who put the Tories in power. Surely returning to the kind of voters you're talking about, it's a recipe for disaster.
There's another argument, Martin, that says actually Boris Johnson got the move he did because he was facing a complete and utter no-hoper and disaster of a Labour leader in Jeremy Corbyn. And he was also dealing with an situation of being fed up with Brexit and it never getting done. Now, the fact is that since Boris Johnson took over, yes, of course, he's had COVID and that was a problem. But actually, the Conservative government under Johnson did nothing at all really effective. Johnson signed up to a very, very bad agreement in Northern Ireland because he couldn't be bothered to read the papers that told us all it was fine until it wasn't fine. So I think there's a degree of realisation. Whatever the polls are telling you about, depending on your catchment area for the polling, I think you will find that more and more people will be saying, actually, are we really satisfied that Labour has got a handle on all of its issues and is a competent government, potentially, in terms of the economy? And do we really want to give them a Tony Blair-style landslide victory? Or are we going to be a bit more canny about it? And I think if Rishi Sunak can do anything in a year which will avoid cataclysm for the Conservative Party, that will be good for the country overall. Not least because if Sunak loses, and loses in a very big way, I think the natural reaction of the Conservative Party will be to split into factions, and most likely it'll head off in a right-wing direction, and it'll be out of office for much longer than might otherwise be the case.
Jonathan, fascinating parallels between now and when Tony Blair came in. Of course, when you were at the heart of government, you were advising the Major administration. Do you see those parallels now bearing strong resonance to the situation then? Infighting, warring factions, and then facing this huge defeat in the face. And how fearful are you that history is going to repeat itself?
Well, there are exact parallels. You're absolutely right, Martin. I think that you've seen a party which is showing a lack of discipline. It is factionalised in the way that John Major suffered from his right wing, who gave up. There was hubris, assuming that the Conservatives would be in power forever. And there's a tiredness that can come forward. And I think one of the things that David Cameron will bring to it is not necessarily fresh, but fresher face. And someone who has optimism through his veins, and that will be energising for the rest of Cabinet. So I think it is changing the game slightly. I wouldn't bet on the Conservatives winning the next election, but I think they're in a better position as a grown-up party than they were 24 hours ago.
Jonathan Haslam, former Director of Comms at 10 Downing Street. Absolutely fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today. Well, there you go. History could repeat itself. What do you think? Well, we'll have lots more on that story throughout the show, and it's a huge one, and there's plenty of coverage, of course, on our website, gbnews.com, because you've helped to make it the fastest-growing national news website in the country. Well done to all of you, and thank you very much. Now, moving on. Of course, it's a landmark day for King Charles. because he's celebrating his 75th birthday today, of course, and earlier there were 2 gun salutes in his honour. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, and this is Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.